Even from tens of miles away, one could still see the rolling columns of thick smoke rising there, staining the once azure sky a gray-black. Robert squinted at the distant, mournful cries carried by the wind, unmoved. Behind him, Prime Minister Rein hurried onto the ramparts. The once vibrant old man appeared to have aged 20 years in just a few days of torment. Disheveled and hollow-eyed, Rein demanded furiously, "Robert, why haven't the southern reinforcements arrived?" He pointed a trembling finger toward the northern fires. "Scouts report Patton's legion is only 100 miles away on the Golden Avenue. They could have arrived in half a day, yet they crawl like turtles." Rein rushed toward Robert, his eyes bloodshot. "You are the kingdom marshal. You hold the city's military power. Why not sortie to intercept the northern vanguard, or at least rescue the refugees? Will you just watch them be slaughtered?" Robert remained calm. He turned to face the old man with a gentle, lingering smile. "Prime Minister, you are tired," Robert said softly. "No, I am not. I am asking you." Rein grabbed Robert's cloak. "Those are the kingdom's people." Robert gently brushed Rein's hand away and adjusted his collar. "People?" he mused, gesturing to the burning horizon. "No, Prime Minister. Those are the embers of a dying era. This kingdom is terminally ill. The corrupt nobles, the bloated bureaucracy, the blindly loyal masses, they are all tumors. If we don't excise these tumors and burn away the rot," Robert inhaled the blood-scented air, "how can a new kingdom be built?" Rein stared, trembling, unable to utter a word. He finally understood. This was no mere war, it was a purge. "You madman." Rein collapsed against the wall in despair. Suddenly, a deep, powerful horn blast echoed from the south. Robert turned to see a sea of purple emerging at the end of the Golden Avenue. Countless banners embroidered with thorn flowers billowed like a purple cloud, advancing toward the capital. The Violet Legion had arrived, the Medici family's calculated savior moment. Robert beamed with triumph. "Look, Prime Minister," he sneered at the ashen-faced Rein. "The saviors have arrived. Let us hope the survivors know how to be grateful." The winds in the western border were even more biting than in the capital, as if the weather itself was trying to tell me to go back to bed. Obsidian territory, the fortress on the wasteland, was shrouded in deep unease. Gale-force winds whipped the banners against the walls. Official communication channels had been severed. Terrifying rumors of the capital's upheaval, the regent's assassination, and the western border being declared traitors filtered in through refugees. "Is it true? Our lord is a wanted man." "Don't talk nonsense," soldiers whispered on the ramparts, anxious about the lack of news. My prolonged absence weighed heavily on everyone's hearts, though I'm sure they were mostly worried about who would sign their paychecks. "Shut up," old John barked, striding over in his heavy furs. Though he was pale and worried, he maintained a firm front for the troops. "The Lord ordered us to hold the fort. Spread rumors again, and I'll throw you out to freeze. Stay alert." Suddenly, a shrill alarm horn blared from the watchtower. Old John's heart skipped a beat as he scrambled up the wall. On the gray horizon, a small cavalry unit was charging toward Obsidian territory like an arrow through the snow. There were only a dozen riders, yet they exuded a suffocating killing intent. Their armor was exquisite, reflecting dazzling golden light despite the gloomy weather. "Is it the capital's punitive force?" A new recruit trembled, his spear shaking in his grip. "Fool," the captain smacked him. "Look closely. A dozen men? They're not here to conquer." As they neared, the banner became clear, a roaring lion on a gold field. The Golden Lion flag. Old John gasped. The LaRoche family's elite guard? They were allies, yet their presence, the strongest force in the West, was deeply unsettling. They stopped at the gate like silent statues. The leader, clad in golden plate, stepped forward. "I am Raymond, captain of the Golden Lion Knights. By order of Lord Lucius, I am here to see Lady Lynn Aurora. Open the gate." The command shook snow from the ramparts. Old John was stunned. To see the lady, not the lord? After verifying their credentials and the unmistakable seal, he complied. As the drawbridge lowered, Old John led a guard unit out. Lynn Aurora emerged from the lord's mansion. She wore a simple white wool dress draped in my black cloak. Her face was weary, but her blue eyes remained calm. "I am Lynn," she said steadily. Captain Raymond's arrogance vanished the moment he saw her. What happened next left the people of Obsidian territory dumbfounded. I was merely a viscount. It's nice to know my lack of status is so consistent. Raymond, as Lucius's right hand, held a status higher than most counts. He would normally only offer a standard salute to me. But now, the proud knight dismounted without hesitation. He removed his helmet, revealing a resolute face. He knelt on one knee, clutching his helmet to his chest in a formal oath of fealty. His dozen knights followed suit. The West's elite warriors knelt in the muddy snow before the young lady. Raymond of the Golden Lion Knights, reporting to my lady. The onlookers were stunned into silence. Lynn's eyes flickered as she realized the gravity of the situation. Rise, she said faintly. Raymond stood, maintaining a respectful posture, and presented a wax-sealed letter with both hands. My lady, this is a secret letter from Lord Lucius. Lynn Aurora took the letter but did not open it immediately. Raymond lowered his voice, whispering, The regent has fallen, Viscount Eli is wanted, and the western border is on the verge of independence. Any one of these reports would shatter an ordinary woman. Lynn merely listened, her grip tightening on the letter until her knuckles turned white, yet she remained composed. My lady, Raymond said, his gaze earnest. The situation is dire. The Obsidian territory is isolated and vulnerable to the Southern Territory or other hostile forces. Lord Lucius requests that you accompany us to Thorn City immediately. It is the only place with walls strong enough and a loyal army to guarantee your absolute safety. Lynn looked at the unopened letter. Combining its arrival with Raymond's urgency, she deduced Lucius's intentions. She glanced at the castle I had built and the shocked townspeople watching her. This was my life's work, a collection of stone and mortar that apparently had the structural integrity of a wet paper bag. If she left, would it fall into chaos? But if she stayed and her identity were exposed, it would bring total destruction. I understand, Lynn breathed. She displayed no tears or panic, only a sudden, commanding dignity. She turned to Old John. Old John, this is my final order as the lady of the territory. From this moment, the Obsidian territory is under total lockdown. No one is to open the gates except for me. Guard this place. Guard my home. And tell him, I am waiting for him in Thorn City. No matter what happens, I will be there. Old John's eyes reddened. I will give my life to protect the Lord's legacy. Without further hesitation, Lynn moved. She boarded the black carriage bearing the LaRoche family crest. Move out, Raymond commanded. The Golden Lion Knights surrounded the carriage, and they departed. The swift party vanished into the blizzard, racing toward Thorn City. Behind them, the lonely castle waited in the cold for its true master. The blizzard intensified as night approached. On the walls of the Obsidian territory, guards squinted through the freezing wind, scanning the gray horizon. Since the Golden Lion Knights departed with the lady, the territory had been gripped by anxiety. Old John had enforced the lockdown strictly. Everyone knew the royal capital had become a slaughterhouse. What is that? A sentry pointed at the horizon, his voice trembling. A black line emerged from the snow, rapidly swelling into a silent, massive torrent. The thunder of hooves shattered the silence. Enemy attack. The captain stopped the alarm, eyes widening as the banners unfurled. The Black Dragon. It's the Black Dragon flag. It's the Lord. Open the gates. The heavy iron gates groaned open. As I appeared on my horse, clad in silver armor, the fear hanging over the Obsidian territory vanished instantly. Wild cheers erupted. Long live the Lord. Welcome home. Seeing the battle-hardened troops and the supply wagons, the people felt a profound sense of security. As long as I was here, the sky would not fall. Old John rushed forward, trembling. I dismounted and steadied the old man. You've worked hard, John. I patted the old man's shoulder, my gaze instinctively searching the castle. It's amazing how quickly a fortress feels like a shoebox when the one person you're looking for isn't in it. The figure I longed for was missing. Where is Lynn? I asked, my voice tight. Old John's smile faltered, his eyes filled with guilt. My lord, shortly before your return, the Golden Lion Knights arrived. Captain Raymond brought a personal letter and a special summons from Lord Lucius. They claimed they had to take the lady to Thorn City for her safety and the sake of the western border. I couldn't stop them. I froze. The joy of my return was replaced by a hollow ache. I did not blame Old John. As a lord hardened by this chaotic era, I immediately grasped Lucius's intent. It wasn't about safety. Lucius was establishing a pillar, a figurehead with the legal authority to defy the royal capital. Lin's bloodline was the cornerstone of that pillar. Thorn City, I murmured. Though I regretted missing her, I felt a sense of relief. She was safer there than here. You did well, John. You couldn't have stopped them. Have the army rest, count the casualties, and settle the refugees. We must prepare for the winter. Yes, my lord. After handling the logistics, I returned to the mansion alone. I pushed open the bedroom door. It remained exactly as she had left it, still carrying her faint scent. I found a handkerchief embroidered with a partial black dragon. Lord Lucius, you are playing a dangerous game, I whispered, tucking it into my tunic. I realized there was no turning back from the kingdom now. If they were pushing her toward that position, I would become the sharpest blade in her hand, carving a path to the throne. Wait for me, I whispered to the empty room. Once I settle things here, I will come for you. Meanwhile, Marquis Leon Black, the former commander of the capital garrison, rode a common horse. Following Buck, Master Glenn, and Salus, he entered his youngest son's territory. Leon's impression of the Obsidian territory was based on an outdated map. He imagined a barren, desolate outpost on the edge of the western border. He expected crumbling walls, muddy streets, and starving peasants. After all, this was a land of exile, a place even barbarians avoided. However, stepping through the gates, Leon doubted he had arrived at the right place. Is this Obsidian territory? Leon stared at the wide, paved bluestone road, a stark contrast to the muddy tracks he expected. Drainage ditches lined the road, keeping it pristine despite the recent snowfall. Neat rows of stone and wooden houses stretched out in orderly fashion. While lacking the ornate decorations of the royal capital, the sturdy, pragmatic architecture impressed the veteran soldier. The hygiene was even more shocking. In the capital, even elite districts reeked of refuse. Here, the air was crisp, smelling only of cold wind and faint coal smoke. The planning is superior to the capital, Leon marveled, noting the trash collection barrels. As the party moved on, Leon's focus shifted to the defenses, and he was stunned. The walls, constructed of a mix of black stone and obsidian, were mirror-smooth yet iron-hard. Giant, well-maintained catapults lined the ramparts, exuding a lethal chill. Leon observed a passing patrol. The 10 soldiers wore uniform black armor, steel swords, and crossbows. Their discipline was bone-deep, forcing Leon to compare them to his own garrison legion remnants. He had to admit, his own troops were outclassed in equipment and quality. Did Eli really train these men? Leon asked Salus, who nodded with a bitter smile. Yes, father. I've heard from our craftsmen that Eli spends heavily here. Money isn't the issue, Leon scoffed. This requires vision, methods, and a level of governance beyond our era. Salus suggested visiting the warehouse to see the extent of Eli's resources. Leon had worried about storage for his caravan, but now realized his concerns were unfounded. Apparently, I'm the only one in this kingdom who actually struggles to find a parking spot. They reached the warehouse behind the castle, and the doors were thrown open. The Marquis, accustomed to royal treasuries, was left speechless. The warehouse was packed with hundreds of sets of brand-new, standardized armor and weapons. The weapons were forged from a superior alloy of obsidian powder and refined iron. Master Glenn proudly opened a sealed chest, revealing boxes of mithril, enough to make a knight bankrupt in the capital, yet here they sat like common vegetables. Leon touched the mithril, stunned by the sheer abundance. With ample food, purified water, and enough gear to arm 10,000, the place was a fortress. It was no mere outpost. It was a self-sufficient, expansion-ready war stronghold. Leon walked back out to the plaza. He watched the black dragon flag snap in the wind and observed the hopeful faces of the people. He felt a profound shock and relief. He had thought he was the tree protecting his sons, only to realize his abandoned youngest had grown into a giant. I had taken root in this desolate land. I was no longer a sheltered noble. I was a true feudal lord, though I still haven't figured out how to make the paperwork as exciting as the sword forging. Despite the cold, the atmosphere inside the lord's manor was intense. The council chamber was packed. On the left sat the Obsidian Territory veterans, Old John, Buck, and Master Glenn. On the right were the newcomers, Leon's Garrison Legion captains and Salus's knights. The air was thick with subtle tension. The locals viewed the newcomers as a logistical burden. The captains, accustomed to Leon's command, instinctively looked to the Marquis for leadership. I cleared my throat, sensing the danger of a dual command structure. It's the kind of setup that usually ends with a mutiny or, at the very least, a very awkward dinner. I stepped down and gestured to the head seat. Father, you are the Marquis and the family elder. This seat belongs to you. Leon looked at his son, then at his expectant former subordinates. Nonsense, Leon said, his voice deep and authoritative. This is Obsidian territory, the domain of the Pendragon family. He walked past the head seat and sat firmly in the first chair on the left. There is no Marquis of the Orlando Kingdom here, Leon declared, sitting straight as a mountain. There is only the father of Viscount Eli Black and a veteran ready to defend this home. He glared at his captains. Listen clearly. From today, the Black family remnants are integrated into the Obsidian territory military. There is only one voice here, Lord Eli's. Only one sword, his. Anyone who relies on past seniority to sow discord will lose their head, Leon warned, hand on his hilt. The captain stood and saluted me with military precision. Leon's iron-fisted concession had cleared the path for unity. I looked at my father with newfound respect. I understood the courage required for such a proud man to make that choice. Thank you, father. I took my seat, my presence commanding. Now, let's discuss our most pressing issue, the population. Nearly 10,000 loyalists had followed Salus. Combined with the existing troops, the population had surged tenfold. Indeed, my lord, Old John reported. Obsidian territory was designed as a military and mining base. We lack the housing. If we don't relocate them, we risk plague or unrest. These farmers and craftsmen were being wasted in a fortress of stone and iron. I nodded, pointing my baton at a river valley on the map 50 miles southeast. Spring City, I said. It was the new territory granted to me by Lucius for my war merits. Unlike the barren Obsidian territory, Spring City boasted fertile land and abundant water. My plan for Spring City as an agricultural and trade hub was stalled by a lack of manpower, as Obsidian territory's existing residents were already settled. Consequently, Spring City remained largely abandoned, maintained only by a few hundred slaves. Seeing the influx of refugees from the royal territory, I realized they were not a burden, but a golden opportunity. These refugees included skilled farmers, experienced craftsmen, and literate stewards. I ordered Old John to relocate all 5,000 refugees to Spring City immediately. Old John was stunned. He worried that uprooting these traumatized people to reclaim wasteland would be poorly received. I stood up, my voice resolute. I promised that any skilled craftsman, smith, carpenter, or tailor would receive benefits. They would be granted free housing, an independent workshop, and startup capital. Farmers would receive land grants, with full ownership of both reclaimed and wild fields. I added a 1-year tax exemption, allowing them to keep all their harvests. The council chamber buzzed with shock at such unprecedented generosity, as if I'd just suggested we all start breathing underwater. The refugees, having lost everything, saw this as a divine blessing. Old John was visibly moved, recognizing the brilliance of the policy. It would solve the overcrowding in Obsidian territory while rapidly revitalizing Spring City. This influx of talent would transform Spring City into a vital rear base and granary. With Obsidian territory focusing on combat and mining, and Spring City on production, my power would form a perfect, self-sustaining loop. I told Old John to assure them that life in the West would be better than in the royal territory. Old John left with newfound energy. I then turned to Buck to address military matters. I noted that the thousands of Garrison Legion veterans brought by my father were poorly equipped and used outdated tactics. I spoke coldly. I ordered Buck to break them up and integrate them into Obsidian territory squads in groups of 10. Local veterans would teach them to use new weapons, coordinate with Wolfkin, and adapt to the Western rhythm. I demanded a cohesive, disciplined army within half a month. Apparently, I'm a fan of impossible deadlines. Buck saluted, confident in the plan. He promised that with better gear and training, these veterans would become elite fighters. I nodded. I then turned to Master Glenn. I told Glenn to take my father to the training grounds to see our true trump card. Marquis Leon followed Master Glenn to the training grounds, where thousands of soldiers were drilling intensely. Leon's breath hitched as he saw the open crates. Inside were brand new weapons, great swords, spears, axes, and shields, all shimmering with the distinct luster of mithril-infused steel. Mithril weapons. Leon picked up a greatsword, feeling its perfect balance. He struck the blade, producing a long, resonant hum. He recognized the exceptional purity and craftsmanship. In the royal capital, only elite captains possessed swords with even a trace of mithril. Such items were status symbols and heirlooms. Minor nobles would kill for a mithril dagger. Yet here, they were piled up like common vegetables. Leon asked in disbelief if these were all mithril. Master Glenn grinned, confirming these were just the first batches. He stated that I refused to let my men fight with inferior gear. The goal was full mithril equipment for every soldier, the Obsidian Territory standard. Leon was dizzy. Not even the Medici family could afford such extravagance. It's nice to know my personal brand of financial irresponsibility is actually a strategic advantage. Leon whispered to himself as he touched the blade. He finally understood why I dared to charge with only 1,000 men at the Valley of Winds. He understood how the Obsidian Territory Iron Cavalry could pierce the northern heavy armor like paper. Against such equipment, the northern warriors were nothing more than savages with scrap metal. Good, very good. Leon swung the great sword, the blade whistling through the air. His fighting spirit reignited. He felt capable of cutting down anyone, even Robert Medici himself. A massive, miles-long procession of refugees moved slowly along the ancient road toward the southeast. Despite the biting wind and snow, the group felt a flicker of hope. Nearly 10,000 refugees had fled the war in the royal territory. The group included farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, all reduced to wearing rough cloth. They had initially been terrified of the journey. To them, the West meant desolation and the stigma of rebellion. They whispered doubts about Spring City, fearing it was nothing but rocks and weeds. Others urged them to be grateful for the chance to survive. However, their anxiety began to fade as they traveled deeper into the territory. They were flanked every 10 meters by fully armored Obsidian Territory cavalry. The soldiers maintained perfect formation, projecting immense discipline. At the front, massive dire wolves pulled supply wagons, guided by fearsome wolfkin warriors. The refugees realized that with such protection, the wilderness was not so terrifying after all. They witnessed the absolute control Obsidian Territory held over the region. Any magical beasts that approached were instantly dispatched by crossbow-wielding patrols. This display of raw power provided the refugees with a profound sense of security. Their fear was replaced by anticipation for their new home. 2 days later, they crested a hill, and the landscape opened up. Old John proudly pointed toward the river valley ahead. Spring City was still modest, with old walls and simple stone houses, but the White Water River flowed nearby, unfrozen even in the deep winter. Farmers wept with joy, kissing the fertile black soil of the White Water River banks. I watched from a ridge, observing the land poised for transformation, mostly because I'd be the one doing the transforming. I held a detailed development plan I had drafted the previous night. My lord, Old John arrived, marveling at the 10,000 refugees. He noted that even just farming would make Spring City the West's greatest granary by autumn. I shook my head, handing over the map. A granary isn't enough in these chaotic times. We need more than just food to survive. Old John opened the map and gasped. Farmland occupied only the periphery of the plan. The core near the White Water River was densely packed with industrial infrastructure. Water wheel arrays, furnaces, workshops, and massive logistics centers. This is an arsenal, I explained, pointing to the river. The river's steep drop will power a series of hydraulic forging workshops. Using water power for hammers and bellows will boost forging efficiency tenfold while saving labor. Ambition burned in my eyes. Master Glenn's output in the Obsidian Territory was limited by resources, but here, I will turn Spring City into the kingdom's premier arsenal and trade hub. With 10,000 laborers, we will produce endless armor and weapons to arm our troops and sell the surplus. Old John trembled, finally grasping the scale of my ambition. I wasn't just seeking refuge. I was building an industrial heart for the western border. I understand. Old John hurried off to organize the construction. Meanwhile, an observer watched from a nearby tent. It was Thor, the shrewd manager of the North Chamber of Commerce's western branch. Thor was a middle-aged, portly man with a keen eye for profit. Since my departure for the royal capital, the chamber had maintained a profitable partnership with Lin in the Obsidian territory. However, the Edict of Suppression had caused a rift within the chamber. Most wanted to cut ties with the rebel me to avoid fallout. Thor, however, made a bold, calculated decision. He brought his entire inventory to follow me to the remote spring city. His assistant complained incessantly about the risk, as if I hadn't already noticed the man's nervous sweating was staining my floorboards. Eli is a wanted criminal. We'll be shut down if we're caught trading with him. Quiet, Thor snapped, gesturing to the bustling site. What do you see? Just refugees. Wrong. Thor's eyes gleamed with the fervor of a gambler holding a winning hand. I see order, efficiency, and immeasurable wealth. Look at the refugees. They have hope. Look at the army. They are disciplined. Thor lowered his voice. He won 20,000 gold coins in the capital and brought back massive supplies. A lord with power, wealth, and administrative talent won't be cowed by a warrant. Thor adjusted his collar and approached me with a professional smile, determined to secure a dominant position in the West. I turned, unsurprised by the merchant's presence. Still willing to do business with a wanted man, Thor? Thor chuckled, acting familiar. Businessmen follow gold, not edicts. Everyone knows the Pendragon family is the true power in the West. I smiled thinly. State your business. Thor got straight to the point. You need timber, stone, and food for this construction. He gestured to his caravan. The North Chamber can provide them. We can supply grain, cloth, and ore. We only ask for a 20% markup. Thor then played his trump card. It was a bold move, assuming I wouldn't just take his goods and forget about the markup entirely. In exchange, we want exclusive agency to sell all tools produced here, excluding your own needs. It was a fair offer, but I stared at him until the merchant broke into a sweat. The agency is yours, but your terms are insufficient. Insufficient? A 20% markup is very low. I don't need money, I interrupted, tossing a gold coin. I need people. 10,000 isn't enough. The capital is in chaos, and the north is slaughtering cities. There are countless displaced craftsmen and refugees. I leaned in, my presence overwhelming. Use your smuggling networks to bring them to me. Farmers, smiths, scholars, I want them all. 1 silver coin for every able-bodied person, 1 gold for every skilled craftsman. And for talent like Master Glenn? Name your price. Thor was stunned. This was human trafficking on a massive scale, undermining the capital itself. The risk, the border is sealed. High risk, high reward, I whispered. When war breaks out, this will be the safest fortress and the greatest arsenal in the West. You will control its trade. How much will I earn? Thor gulped, envisioning a mountain of gold. Wealth favors the bold. I'll do it, he declared, his face trembling with greed. A look that usually precedes a very expensive mistake. My lord, rest assured. Even if I run the caravan's horses to death, I will get those people to you. Excellent. I nodded, turning to gaze at the bustling construction site and the surging Whitewater River. I intended to fully capitalize on the population boom brought by the chaos before the fires of war consumed the entire kingdom. Spring City was destined to boil over. Thorn City, capital of the western border, the heart of the West, was currently shrouded in a chilling, murderous winter. Thick gray walls were draped in icicles, and while the moat had a thin layer of ice, dark currents surged beneath. Although Lucius had publicly burned the imperial decree at Anvil Fortress, declaring the West's secession, within Thorn City, the seemingly monolithic noble circle still harbored dissent. 4 old guard nobles accustomed to comfort, opposing the royal capital and being branded rebels, was a terrifying prospect. Fear bred hesitation, and hesitation led to betrayal. Tonight, the governor's mansion was brightly lit for a winter banquet. The table was laden with roasted lamb, southern wine, and fine silver, an air of opulent decency. A dozen prominent nobles attended, yet the atmosphere was frigid. No one dared touch their cutlery or breathe loudly. all eyes fixed on Lucius, who sat at the head, calm as a lake. "Gentlemen," he said, swirling his wine, "I've heard whispers that some of you find the West too cold and wish to seek the sun in the South." The nobles turned deathly pale, cold sweat beading on their foreheads. "Lord Lucius, that is a lie," a count stammered. "We are loyal to the West." "Are you?" Lucius interrupted, tossing a stack of letters onto the table. They were private letters to Marshal Robert Medici, filled with sycophantic praise. "And what are these?" Lucius asked, his tone as casual as discussing the weather. The count collapsed into his chair, legs failing him. "What did Robert Medici promise you? Retaining your titles? More land?" Lucius stood and walked behind the count, placing hands on his shoulders. "You seem to have forgotten. This is the West. There are no Medicis here, and I despise those who sharpen knives behind my back." As the guilty nobles begged for mercy, Lucius said, "Too late. Do it." Golden Lion Knights emerged from behind screens. The sound of blades piercing flesh filled the room, blood splattering the white tablecloth and fine food. The traitors were executed instantly. The remaining nobles trembled, some hiding under the table. Lucius wiped his hands with a napkin, unmoved. "This is the voice of the West. From today on, I want no more discord. If anyone wants to go to the royal capital, I can send their head instead. Understood?" "Yes, yes. We swear loyalty to the governor." In that bloody night, Lucius ruthlessly unified the West's resolve. I suppose nothing brings people together quite like the immediate threat of being turned into a centerpiece. Meanwhile, deep within the governor's mansion, in a quiet courtyard, Lynn Aurora sat by the window, watching the falling snow. Since being brought to Thorn City by the Golden Lion Knights, she had been treated with higher status than a local lord. Despite the servants and guards, she felt like a bird in a golden cage. "Eli," she whispered. Though Captain Raymond assured her I had returned safely to the Obsidian territory, the situation was volatile. Royal warrants and rumors of invading armies terrified her. She longed to return to my side, even to face blades with me, but she couldn't. She knew why Lucius kept her here and what her bloodline meant in this era. "My lady," a maid announced, "the governor is here." Lucius entered, carrying the chill of the wind and a faint, unmistakable scent of blood. "Uncle Lucius." Lynn bowed. He looked at her. She was thinner, but her blue eyes, just like her father, the late king, were more resilient. "Still awake?" Lucius asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I can't sleep," she replied. "I want news of I." "He is safe," Lucius said. "That boy. He is more capable than I imagined. He is no longer the youth you need to worry about." Lynn sighed in relief, though her worry remained. Lucius hesitated, then said, "Lynn, put on your cloak and come with me." "Where?" "To see something you must witness." Half an hour later, atop the eastern wall of Thorn City, Lucius led her to a watchtower overlooking the eastern wasteland. Lucius pointed silently toward the dark, snow-covered earth outside the walls. Lynn followed his gaze. Her pupils contracted, and she trembled uncontrollably, struck by the sight. It was a scene that chilled her soul. Beyond the shadows of the walls, a writhing mass of humanity moved, refugees. People from the royal territory and the war-torn central regions, having fled through hell. They were in rags, shivering in the cold, dragging empty bags and clutching their children. They gathered beneath the walls, begging the guards for a bowl of soup or shelter, only to be met with spiked barriers and emotionless soldiers. Further out, small mounds in the snow marked the dead, those who had frozen or starved while waiting. Some bodies were half buried in snow, a stiff hand or a face frozen in despair visible. Mothers held dead children. Husbands shielded their wives' corpses. It was hell on earth. Lynn wept, covering her mouth. "Is this the kingdom now?" Lucius watched with cold, detached sorrow. "This is a kingdom without order," Lucius said. "When royal power becomes a tool for ambition, this is the fate of the people." He gestured to the kneeling masses. "They fled here thinking the West could save them. But we lack the food and housing. If we open the gates, Thorn City will collapse, and everyone will die." Lucius turned to the weeping Lynn. "Do you see? They need more than bread or charity. They need a reason to live. They need the hope of someone who can end this chaos and rebuild order." The words struck Lynn like lightning. She realized how naive her desire to be a protected wife had been. In this broken world, without supreme power and strength, her home would be as easily destroyed as the tents on the wasteland. I was bleeding at the front, shielding her. Could she really just hide in the back as a burden? I suppose being a damsel in distress is a full-time job, but the benefits package is terrible. Lin realized her Aurora bloodline wasn't a curse, but a weapon and a responsibility. Wiping away her tears, she gripped the cold stone railing, her fear replaced by resolve. "Uncle Lucius," she said, "I understand. I can do it." Lucius watched the girl seemingly mature in an instant, his heart filled with complex emotions. He felt pride, yet was overwhelmed by deep guilt and self-reproach. He was forcing a girl who craved peace onto a treacherous path of conquest. For the sake of the West and the struggle against the capital, he had pushed her to the edge. "Good," Lucius replied, turning away to hide his pain. "From tomorrow, the entire West will fight for you." A message more shocking than Western independence began to spread rapidly across the kingdom. Western Governor Lucius LaRoche issued a formal proclamation. He exposed the capital's truth. Young King Aidan Aurora was merely a puppet of the Medici family, and Regent Federico had been murdered by them. Most importantly, the true heir, Princess Lynn Aurora, was alive and in Thorn City. She would soon raise the royal banner to overthrow the usurpers and restore the kingdom, sending shockwaves through the realm. Refugees, minor nobles, and neutral factions all turned their eyes toward the west. Thorn City, an ancient stronghold, felt unusually solemn today. The air was thick with a sacred, suffocating tension. As the morning sun hit the LaRoche golden lion flag, the long silent bells of Thorn Cathedral began to toll. The deep, resonant chimes echoed through every corner of the city. The sound seemed to carry across the land, reaching the distant capital and the entire kingdom. This was not an alarm, but a proclamation. The central square was packed. Tens of thousands of citizens, soldiers, and nobles crowded together. All eyes were fixed on the white jade platform before the cathedral. Lucius LaRoche stood there in formal black attire, wearing his governor's medal. His sharp, hawkish gaze swept over the expectant crowd. "Citizens of the West, people of Orlando." Lucius's voice, amplified by magic, thundered across the square. "You have heard many rumors. They call us rebels, murderers of the regent, and collaborators with outsiders. The marshal in the capital uses forged decrees to paint us as villains." Lucius's voice turned cold. "I tell you, that is a lie woven by usurpers to hide their crimes." The crowd stirred. While they believed in the West, they lacked a counter-argument to the capital's legitimacy, which is a fancy way of saying they didn't know who to cheer for yet. Lucius bowed deeply toward the cathedral doors. "If they want to talk about legitimacy," he declared, his eyes burning, "we will show them the truth. Behold, the princess of the Orlando kingdom, daughter of King August, and rightful heir, Her Highness, Lynn Aurora." The name hit the crowd like a thunderclap, leaving them stunned. Lynn Aurora? The princess, presumed dead for years, was alive in the West? The cathedral doors slowly opened. There was no extravagant procession. Only a woman in silver armor and a deep blue cloak bearing the Aurora Sun emblem emerged. She had brilliant platinum hair and deep, ocean blue eyes. Her innate nobility and bearing were identical to the late King August. Lynn walked onto the platform with steady, regal grace, a queen without a crown. Facing the stunned thousands, she showed no hesitation. Her royal presence plunged the noisy square into absolute silence. "I am Lynn Aurora," she stated, her voice clear and firm. Lucius stepped forward with the proclamation to the citizens of Orlando. "Robert Medici has imprisoned the young king, murdered the regent, and stolen the throne. He must be executed. The false King Aidan is but a puppet. His rule is illegal. Princess Lynn has returned to restore our nation. I, Lucius LaRoche, on behalf of the West, swear." Lucius knelt before her. "We support Lynn Aurora as the sole, legitimate queen of Orlando. We shall hold her coronation in days. Long live the queen." The crowd erupted in a frenzy of cheers. The Westerners finally had their cause. They were no longer rebels, but loyalists fighting for the true heir. For the queen. March on the capital. The roar of the crowd shook the sky. 3 days later, in the Sun Palace, Robert Medici shattered an antique vase in a fit of rage. It's a bold interior design choice to start your morning by destroying expensive pottery. The powerful marshal stood amidst the wreckage. His face, usually elegant, was twisted into a demonic mask. Lin Aurora? He gripped the proclamation so hard his nails pierced the parchment. She was supposed to be dead. How is she alive and in the West? His chest heaved with fury. He had anticipated Western independence, my resistance, and even Northern invasions. But he never accounted for the princess, who had returned like a ghost at the most critical moment. She had become the West's sharpest blade. Robert was a brilliant man. He understood the implications perfectly. His power relied entirely on the puppet Aiden and the claim of legitimacy. Now, the West possessed a superior claim. As the late king's eldest daughter, Lin held far greater authority and blood right than a 9-year-old boy. Especially with the flower of the wind rumors spreading, Robert realized his greatest political vulnerability had been exposed. If he could not eliminate Lin, every decree he issued would become a laughingstock. Those wavering nobles and factions dissatisfied with the Medici family will use this as an excuse to defect to the West. An adjutant trembled as he entered. The northern vanguard has breached our outer defenses and is closing in on the capital. Should we mobilize? The North. Robert whirled around, his glare forcing the adjutant back. The North is nothing. Those savages only know how to loot. They cannot shake the kingdom's foundation. The West, that damned West, is our true enemy. Lin's existence threatened my very legitimacy. Pass my orders. Robert forced himself to remain calm, his eyes glinting with ruthlessness. All troops, except for essential garrison forces, are to enter Level 1 combat readiness. We must neutralize the northern obstacle quickly. Regardless of the cost, drive them back or negotiate. Then, Robert stared westward with lethal intent. We concentrate all power to crush the fake queen, and that damned me. Also, he grabbed a quill and began writing furiously. Issue a decree in the king's name. Denounce Lucius for his fabrications. This Lin is a fraud, a lowborn prostitute posing as royalty. The real Lin Aurora died years ago. This is a desecration of the royal bloodline and the late king. Anyone spreading these rumors shall be executed. The news ignited the Orlando kingdom, turning a rebellion into a war of legitimacy. What was thought to be a simple suppression of rebels had evolved into a battle for the throne. In the Eastern Territory, Duke Russell examined the intelligence with an amused smile. One puppet king controlled by the Medici and one resurrected queen. This play is getting interesting. As his nobles argued over which side to support, Duke Russell silenced them. Legitimacy is merely an ornament for the victor. Send envoys to both Thorn City and the Sun Palace. Tell them the Eastern main force is still gathering. We need time to reorganize. As for who to help, he sneered, we side with the highest bidder. Of course, I hope they destroy each other, leaving the throne for the taking. Across the kingdom, in lands ravaged by war or oppressed by tyranny, the tide was turning. Countless minds began to stir. Neutral nobles, survivors of Robert's purges, and loyalist veterans all took notice. No content to condense. Hearing the name, Lin Aurora, and her manifesto felt like seeing a lighthouse in the dark. The princess lives. The West is our hope. Whether out of faith or opportunism, an invisible current began to flow. People flocked toward the West, bringing swords, wealth, and hope. The West was no longer a desolate exile. It was the center of the storm and a sanctuary of hope. The final showdown for the continent's fate had begun. Royal capital Orlandia, Sun Palace. The palace, once a symbol of glory, was now shrouded in gloom. In the marshal's study, curtains were drawn, leaving only the pale light of candles. It's amazing how much brooding people can get done when they refuse to pay for a decent lamp. Robert stood before a military map, his back stiff and grim. Despite his strict gag orders and executions of gossiping servants, the truth leaked out like sewage. Lin Aurora is alive. The West has crowned a true queen. These rumors burrowed into the minds of every noble in the capital. Panic festered in the city's unseen corners. Southern nobles and Medici military commanders sat around the long table, shaken by the queen title. Are you all mute? Robert's voice was icy. The northern wolves are at our door, and the western lions are at our throat. I need solutions, not silence. A terrified southern noble stood up, wiping cold sweat from his brow. Marshal, the situation is dire. He pointed to the black area on the map representing the Northern Army. Winston's madmen have pushed south of the Valley of Winds. If we split our forces, the capital is vulnerable. If we hold, the West will crush us. We cannot win 2 wars at once. He swallowed hard. Perhaps we should sue for peace? Robert narrowed his eyes. Yes. The noble hurried, thinking Robert was interested. Duke Winston only wants land and wealth. We can cede the barren lands north of the Valley of Winds and pay reparations. Once the North retreats, we can concentrate our might on the fake queen in the West. Bang! Patton Medici slammed his fist onto the table, cracking the mahogany. Fool, is your brain filled with paste? Have you been scared witless by that queen? I'd say it's impressive how quickly a room full of powerful men can collectively lose their spines. The noble shrank back. Patton, a hulking man reeking of blood and battle, glared at the room. He was the Medici family's sharpest blade and a hawk. Cede land, pay reparations. Patton sneered, his voice booming. If the West were just rebels, that might be a strategic retreat. But now, Patton hammered the table. They have crowned a queen under the Aurora banner. Do you realize this is a battle for legitimacy and the hearts of the people? Patton roared at the wavering nobles. If we show even a hint of weakness or bow to northern savages now, what will the fence-sitters in the capital and our own soldiers think? They will think the Medici are weak and incapable of protection. They will defect to the West to grovel before that princess. Patton drew his sword and stabbed it into the map. We must fight. We need a crushing, glorious victory. We must show everyone that the Medici blade is sharper than the Queen's. Only by following us is there a path to survival. The officers were stirred, but an untimely voice interrupted. Minister of Finance, Marquis Bourbon, stood up. I agree we cannot show weakness, but please use your heads. The Northerners are mad dogs. Even Marquis Leon Black's garrison legion was crippled in the Valley of Winds. If we commit our main forces to a head-on clash, even a victory would be Pyrrhic. Marquis Bourbon spread his hands. After such heavy losses, how would we defend against the western border's well-equipped Liberation Army? Don't forget, the western border is the strongest of the 4, Patton retorted, the room chilling at the mention. As they bickered, Robert Medici, who had been silent, stepped forward and silenced them with a cold, intimidating gaze. It's amazing how quickly a room goes quiet when someone stops pretending to be a decent human being. His usual gentle, fake smile was replaced by a chilling, heart-stopping coldness. Uncle Patton is right, Robert said. We cannot show weakness now. That is suicide. Patton beamed. However, Robert turned to the Marquis. Marquis Bourbon is also correct. We cannot fight a war of attrition. Our elites are meant to secure the throne, not trade lives with those wretches. Everyone was stunned. How could they fight without a war of attrition? Robert picked up his marshal's baton and walked to the map. He scanned the terrain surrounding the royal capital. The baton's tip landed heavily on an obscure spot northwest of the capital. Here, Robert said, his voice cold. Gray leaf forest. Scouts have confirmed a northern vanguard of about 5,000 near the forest, 50 miles northwest. A cruel glint flashed in Robert's eyes. They aren't the main force, just a ragtag group of northern tribes. They've been looting so recklessly that their formation is scattered and discipline is non-existent. They assume we wouldn't dare sortie, so they've abandoned even basic night patrols. Robert looked at Patton. This is your prey, uncle. If we are to establish our authority, we must crush the weakest target completely. Take 10,000 elites of the Violet Legion tonight. Bypass the main road and flank them. I want them wiped out. No prisoners. I will build a monument of 5,000 northern heads at the capital gates to show everyone that the Medici family, not just that brat from the western border, is the one who truly kills. Patton's initial surprise quickly turned into bloodthirsty ecstasy. This was the slaughter he craved, a battle to strike fear into the hearts of all. Understood, Marshal. Patton saluted sharply and strode out, his armor clanking. Robert turned back to the map, staring at the words, Western Border. A cold sneer curled his lips. Lynn Aurora, you want to be queen? Let's see if you survive until your coronation. The candles in the room flickered, apparently trying to distance themselves from the conversation. Night fell, and the wind wailed through the withered branches of gray leaf forest like a ghost. Only 50 miles from the royal capital Orlandia, a half-day's march for light cavalry. Deep in the forest, the Northern Vanguard's camp was a scene of chaotic revelry. Bonfires roared, melting the snow into mud. The air reeked of roasted meat, sour ale, and the desperate cries of women. The camp was a mess, though I suppose organized crime is still just crime. Stolen flour sacks lay trampled in the mud. Gold, silk, and noble tapestries were discarded like trash. The 5,000 troops were a mix of small northern tribes. Having lived in frozen misery, they were intoxicated by the wealth of the royal territory and had lost their minds to looting. Drink. These southern softies, wine is sweet. Drunken soldiers laughed, tearing into stolen chickens. Ironwall Pass? The capital garrison? They're nothing before our axes. Tomorrow, we take Orlandia. I hear their women are soft and gold paves the streets. Near the central bonfire, the leader sat. A burly man nicknamed Broken Tooth lounged on a tiger skin rug. Bare-chested and hairy, he guzzled wine from a ruby-encrusted gold goblet. Red wine dripped down his beard onto his greasy chest. "Boss," a subordinate stammered. The scouts signaled something wrong in the woods. Broken Tooth kicked him over. "It's just the wind, you coward." Broken Tooth brandished his axe. "We are in the heart of the royal territory. Who dares challenge us? Party all night. Tomorrow, I'll piss on the little king's throne." The soldiers roared with laughter, drowning out any warning signals. Blinded by greed and alcohol, they had no idea death was upon them. On a high ridge overlooking the camp, the green flag with the snake and coin emblem fluttered silently in the wind. Patton sat atop a massive warhorse. The horse was armored in purple scales, its hooves muffled with soft leather. Patton himself was fully geared. His 10,000 troops were equipped with extreme luxury. Their weapons were alloyed with refined gold, their shields were massive, and their arrows were armor-piercing. This wasn't an army, it was a moving mountain of wealth. Unlike the practical, rusted iron of the western border, this army radiated the suffocating power of money. Patton looked down at the northern soldiers with utter disdain. "Uncivilized beasts," he muttered. "No sentries? What a waste of my time." He waved his hand. "Bring them up." 30 massive machines, covered in black cloth, were rolled to the ridge's edge. The cloths were pulled back. They revealed the rapid-fire explosive ballistae, purchased and improved by the Medici family at great cost. Each machine cost as much as a small castle, and the ammunition was even pricier. It really is amazing how much effort people put into finding expensive ways to ruin someone's day. The bolts were thick as an arm, tipped with explosive powder canisters. "We're crushing you with money," Patton sneered. "Light them." "Ready." The operators lit the fuses, the flames glowing like the eyes of death. "Fire." The terrifying sound of bowstrings snapping echoed. 30 ballistae fired simultaneously, sending flaming bolts screaming through the night. They struck the camp like a meteor shower. "What's that sound?" Broken Tooth looked up just as the first bolt hit the central bonfire. A series of earth-shattering explosions followed, engulfing the camp in fire. Explosions reduced the crude leather tents to ash, scattering food and supplies into the air. The drunken Northern Territory soldiers, caught off guard, were shredded by shrapnel and shockwaves before they could even stand. Screams replaced laughter as limbs flew. Broken Tooth, thrown to the ground by the blast, roared, "Enemy attack." I scrambled up, stunned to find my camp transformed into a sea of fire. A real improvement on the decor, honestly. "What is this? Magic?" Before I could process the thought, a second wave of crossbow bolts rained down. This volley was wider and more precise. Panic-stricken horses broke their tethers, trampling fleeing soldiers in their frenzy. The Northern Territory's vaunted charge collapsed before it could even form. "Grab your weapons," Broken Tooth shouted, cutting down deserters to rally his men. Suddenly, the rhythmic thud of heavy infantry emerged from the woods. Violet Legion soldiers in heavy armor, wielding tower shields, advanced like a wall of steel. Behind the disciplined shield wall, spearmen and crossbowmen closed in. For the Medici, crush them. The Violet Legion advanced with the cold precision of a meat grinder. Desperate, The remaining Northern Territory soldiers charged with primal ferocity. They roared, swinging axes and maces, hoping to break the iron line with sheer force. A Northern warrior's axe slammed into a tower shield, sparks flying. The enchanted shield didn't even budge, showing only a faint white mark. Instantly, 3 steel spears snaked through the shield gaps. The warrior's leather armor failed, and he fell, riddled with holes. It was a one-sided slaughter. Northern valor proved futile against superior equipment and tactical discipline. No, this is impossible. Watching his men fall, Broken Tooth felt true terror as the purple wall of death closed in. He realized he wasn't fighting soft Southerners, but monsters armed to the teeth. Break out. Follow me. Abandoning the fight, Broken Tooth gathered 100 guards to carve a path to the flank. Patton Medici appeared on horseback, blocking his path. "Want to leave?" Patton sneered. "Did you ask my sword?" Broken Tooth leaped, swinging his axe with mountain-splitting force at Patton. Patton barely moved his head. "Too slow," he whispered, his sword tip striking the axe's pivot point with supernatural precision. The vibration numbed Broken Tooth's hand, sending his axe swinging into empty air. With a flash of cold light, Patton's blade traced a graceful arc. Broken Tooth's head parted from his neck while he was still midair. The headless corpse hit the ground. With their leader dead, the Northern soldiers dropped their weapons, begging for mercy. Patton rode past the kneeling captives, his expression cold and indifferent. Remembering Robert's orders, Patton declared, "No prisoners. Kill them." The Violet Legion soldiers executed the defenseless captives without hesitation. Screams and curses echoed through the gray leaf forest for an hour. The slaughter ended only when no Northern soldier remained standing. As fires consumed the corpses, Patton wiped his blade with a handkerchief and tossed it into the flames. Clean the battlefield. It's nice to see he's at least committed to basic hygiene while committing war crimes. Recover every piece of armor, weapon, and crossbow bolt. Each bolt costs 10 gold coins. Don't waste them. Soldiers scavenged the dead, stripping armor and even pulling gold teeth. This was the Medici way: kill, then profit. It's comforting to know that even in the middle of a massacre, we're essentially just aggressive tax collectors. Royal capital Orlandia, Sun Palace. The palace, recently shaken by mutiny, now basked in golden sunlight. The atmosphere in the marshal's office had shifted entirely. Robert leaned back in his velvet chair, reading the report delivered by a Griffin Knight. He tapped his fingers against the blood-stained parchment, a satisfied sound. 5,000 annihilated. Robert chuckled, his laughter growing into a triumphant roar. "Huh, excellent. Less than 100 casualties for 5,000 kills. This is true Medici warfare." He slammed the report onto the table, his eyes burning with fanaticism. To him, this victory validated his theory of money warfare. Northern savagery was nothing against superior firepower. They were merely pigs for the slaughter. Carrots and sticks, Robert mused at the window. That 10,000 golden bolts was well spent. The Northern barbarians must be terrified by the Violet Legion's power. They now know the royal capital is not for them. We will offer them a path to retreat, and these greedy wolves will crawl back to their ice plains. Robert, a merchant at heart, believed everyone had a price. "Come," he ordered his scribes. "Copy this report 10,000 times. No, 100,000. Use every propaganda channel. I want every rat in this city to know of our epic victory at Grey Leaf Forest." Robert gestured grandly. "Have the bards sing it in taverns. Have the criers shout it in the squares. Tell the citizens that Robert Medici is the war god who saved us, and Patton is our iron shield. Tell them the Medici have secured their safety. The war is over." "Yes, Marshal." The Medici propaganda machine roared to life. Apparently, truth is just a matter of how many pamphlets you can print before lunch. By noon, news of the great victory washed over the fearful city like a refreshing rain. "Did you hear? General Patton personally decapitated 10 Northern giants." 10? I heard 50. Marshal Robert lured them into a trap and burned them all. Gods, I knew we could count on the Medici. Bards and citizens across Orlandia were buzzing with excitement, desperate for good news. They craved a victory to cling to. After the fall of Iron Wall Pass, the regent's death, and the Western Rebellion, the capital's nerves were frayed. This victory acted like a potent hallucinogen, numbing their collective fear. Nobles who had packed to flee south halted their departures. They returned their valuables to safes, relieved. We stay? With Marshal Robert, the capital is secure. Why leave? The capital is the safest place. Tonight, we celebrate at the Golden Rose Tavern. Panic vanished, replaced by frantic optimism. Citizens flooded the streets, waving green flags and chanting for the Medici. Some set off fireworks, their light pale in the daylight, but enough to feed their vanity. Orlandia basked in a false sense of security. They partied as if the encroaching darkness were merely passing clouds. It was no cloud, it was the cloak of death. 100 miles away, the Northern Army camp lay under a gray sky. Unlike the capital's revelry, this camp was suffocated by a deathly, blood-congealed silence. The stench of the gray leaf forest fire seemed to linger on the wind. Outside the gates, charred, mangled survivors knelt before their Duke, weeping over the previous night's hell. Duke, a survivor missing an ear sobbed, kowtowing uncontrollably. Those Southerners, they aren't human. They used explosive bolts to burn most of our brothers alive. They refused our surrender, the survivor cried, his smoke-stained face twisted in despair and hatred. Patton beheaded Broken Tooth. Even when the rest begged for mercy, they slaughtered them. They stacked our brothers' heads into a tower at the forest crossroads. They stripped the bodies and hung them from trees to show the North the price of offending the South. The news hit the Northern officers like a spark in a powder keg. Their eyes turned bloodshot. For the North, where honor and vengeance were paramount, defeat was acceptable, but dishonor was not. Executing prisoners and desecrating corpses was an unforgivable insult to their ancestors. They forgot their own prior atrocities. Kill them, the tent roared. I'll skin those Southern bastards and make rugs out of them. A dozen bear-like Northern generals hacked at the oak table with axes and broadswords. Wood chips flew, mirroring their shattered restraint. Give the order, Duke. A one-eyed general slammed his axe into the map, burying it in Orlandia. Nothing says tactical planning quite like destroying the furniture. We cannot swallow this humiliation. 5,000 brothers died, and they spat on our faces. If we don't tear Patton apart and wash the capital in blood, we have no face to return to the North. The tent seethed with murderous intent. Winston Olaf, the Northern Duke, sat silently on his white bear fur chair, his expression darker than a coming blizzard. The calculation in his gray-blue eyes was replaced by a bottomless, icy chill. He was a pragmatist. He had only wanted loot and reparations, not to exhaust his resources for someone else's throne. But Robert Medici's cruelty had crossed the line. A tower of heads. Winston rasped. Good. If you want to instill fear, then so be it. He stood abruptly. He drew his ancestral blade, Winter's Bite, and drove it deep into the map, right through the capital. The strike pierced his last hesitation. A wolf turns back for a reason, he told his men, his voice cold as iron. He knew that if he didn't raise the capital and topple that tower of heads, his authority would crumble. The Olaf family's rule depended on this. It was no longer about profit. It was a blood feud for survival and dignity. He strode out to his army. Thousands of Northern soldiers, already aware of the massacre, growled like wounded beasts. Winston stood on a platform, raising his sword as the ancient, mournful war horn sounded, calling all scattered raiding parties to assemble. He pointed his blade toward the glittering, oblivious capital. Forget the gold. Forget the silk. This is for the blood of the North. For our 5,000 brothers. Attack. Kill every Southerner in green. I will use Robert's skull as a goblet. I will plant the Olaf flag atop the Sun Palace. I will make Olaf the king of this kingdom. Ambition and hatred merged perfectly. If they wouldn't let him leave, he would take their throne. I suppose that's one way to settle a travel dispute. Tens of thousands of soldiers raised their weapons. Their roar shook the earth and shattered the clouds. The wolves had turned back, bringing a winter of total destruction to the dreaming capital. Orlandia, Sun Palace. Afternoon sunlight filtered into the study, thick with the scent of expensive cigars and aged brandy. Robert leaned back, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. He wore a satisfied smile, convinced the world was in his palm. Across from him, the Minister of Finance, Marquis Bourbon, beamed with sycophantic praise. Marshal Robert, a brilliant victory. The Battle of Grey Leaf Forest shattered the North's momentum and silenced all dissenters. With no one left in the royal capital to challenge the Medici family, Robert Medici sipped his wine dismissively. He traced the western border on a map, eyeing its vast territories. With the North stabilized, it is time to discuss the spoils of war. Robert looked at Marquis Bourbon with the shrewdness of a merchant. Once we finish off the false queen, the western border's mines, trade routes, and the lucrative gem city are up for grabs. Is the Bourbon family interested? Of course, Marquis Bourbon exclaimed, eyes bright. The Bourbon family follows your lead, Marshal. They laughed, treating the western border as meat already on their cutting board. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed. The study doors were violently kicked open, slamming against the walls with a terrifying bang. Marquis Bourbon spilled his wine in shock. Robert, about to lash out, froze upon seeing the intruder, a disheveled, mud-caked scout from the Southern Territory, missing his helmet. A fresh whip mark scarred his face, a souvenir from his frantic ride. Marshal, the scout gasped, falling to his knees, voice trembling with terror. Disaster. Something terrible has happened. What is it? Robert asked coldly, suppressing his annoyance. Did the Northerners retreat? Where to? No, they didn't retreat, the scout replied, eyes bloodshot with despair. The Northerners have gone mad. They abandoned their loot and slaughtered their own servants and women. They've gathered tens of thousands of troops in the north. Like wild beasts, they are marching at breakneck speed toward the royal capital. Robert stood abruptly, shattering his wine glass. What? They didn't leave? No, they aren't here for wealth. They're here for blood, the scout cried. They've wiped out our 3 forward outposts. At this speed, they'll be at the gates in a day and a half. Marquis Bourbon's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The Minister of Finance turned pale, his legs giving way as he collapsed. How can this be? He muttered. Weren't they after money? We showed our strength. Why aren't they leaving? Are they not afraid of death? Robert stood rigid, his smile replaced by shock and a burgeoning, violent rage. He turned to the map they had just been using to divide spoils. Damn savages. They don't know when they're beaten. With a roar, Robert swept the maps, documents, and ink bottles off the table. Ink stained the carpet like blood. He realized his error. He had measured beasts by a merchant's logic, assuming they would weigh the costs and accept a payoff. He had forgotten that wolves have bloodlust. I suppose it's hard to negotiate with someone who doesn't care about their own profit margins. His brutal display of power hadn't intimidated them. It had ignited a thirst for vengeance. The wolves no longer wanted meat. They wanted human lives. Silence filled the room, broken only by Robert's heavy breathing. After a moment of rage, Robert closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. When he opened them, his gaze was chillingly calm. As the heir to the Medici family and marshal of the kingdom, he could not falter. He walked to the window, looking down at Irlandia. Its high walls, towers, and deep moats made it an impenetrable fortress. He began calculating the odds. The Northerners are fierce, but they lack siege equipment. They are field soldiers, not siege specialists. And Robert clenched his fist. I have the well-equipped Violet Legion and a steady stream of mercenaries. I have the terrain. We have the highest walls, endless supplies, and... He glanced at the opulent merchant buildings, limitless gold. Without supplies, how long could the starving, freezing Northerners last? 3 days? 5. Hunger and cold would finish them. Robert chuckled with cruel confidence. If this is inevitable, let them come. This is a chance to cement my absolute authority. Guards, he barked. Full alert. Summon General Patton and all Southern nobles for an emergency war council. Tell them, anyone late will be fed to the wolves. Half an hour later, in the war room, Patton Medici arrived, his armor still smelling of gunpowder. Hearing of the northern advance, he showed no fear, only a sneering contempt. Those suicidal fools, Patton said, cleaning his sword. They want to siege us? A bunch of beggars with axes. He looked at the pale nobles and laughed. Don't worry. As long as I stand on these walls, 10,000 wolves won't set foot inside. Reassured, the nobles listened as Robert spoke. This battle concerns the survival of the kingdom and the glory of the Medici family. Open the vaults. Robert stared at Patton. Tell the mercenaries and guards. 1 gold coin for every northern soldier killed. 10 for an officer, plus wine and women. The room erupted. A gold coin was a year's wages for a commoner. And for the head of Winston Olaf, Robert slammed the table. I grant a count's title and a southern castle. Even the wealthy nobles gasped. A title and a castle. This was a path to nobility. Long live the marshal. Kill the savages. Greed replaced fear, and the room turned into a frenzy. Robert watched them, a satisfied, cold smile on his lips. Even with money, he gripped his scepter. We can crush them beneath our walls. The Medici wealth transformed into a high-efficiency war machine. Wagons of gold were rushed to the walls. Look, a supply officer shouted, tossing coins to the soldiers. Kill them, and this is yours. The soldiers roared, their fear replaced by a hunger for slaughter and wealth. Supplies flooded the ramparts. Fire oil, boulders, and armor-piercing bolts. To stop the wolf cavalry, Robert ordered the smelting of scrap metal. Pots of molten iron were hoisted to the gates, ready to rain liquid fire on any who dared approach. Within a day, Orlandia was transformed into a golden fortress, armed to the teeth. It's amazing what people will do when you start throwing money at their problems. Like a golden beast, it waited with jaws agape for the vengeful wolves of the north. A brutal siege, destined to decide the kingdom's fate, is about to begin. Royal capital Orlandia, King's Gate. Once a bustling hub of wealth, the gate is now shrouded in the suffocating gloom of war. The sky is oppressively gray. Robert has replaced the colorful banners with flags bearing snakes and coins, enforcing a harsh curfew and strict access controls. A long queue of people waits at the gate. Wealthy merchants, usually accustomed to bribing their way through, are now being ruthlessly turned away. It's almost heartwarming to see money fail to solve a problem for once. Move aside. Southern soldiers shove aside carriages to clear a path for a military convoy. The convoy carries steel arrows, Greek fire, and grain. Marshal's orders. Only military supplies allowed, the officer bellows. He watches the crowd with the predatory intensity of a guard dog. Soldiers conduct humiliating searches on everyone entering. They tear apart luggage and bread, fearing infiltrators from the north or west. Amidst the disgruntled crowd stands an inconspicuous middle-aged man, dressed in a faded linen robe and worn boots. He looks like an unlucky traveling merchant. Followed by a silent attendant. This is Victor, the envoy of Duke Russell from the Eastern Territory. As the East's top shadow, Victor avoids drawing attention. In these times, exposure means death or becoming a political pawn. Name, origin, business, a soldier demands. Victor, sir, he replies. Victor offers a humble smile and presents forged documents. I am a grain merchant from Bountiful Town. The papers are flawlessly forged. The Medici family cannot possibly know every minor merchant in the vast South. The soldier eyes him and his meager luggage suspiciously. Where is your grain? Oh, don't ask. Victor laments. Bandits robbed my 10 carts of wheat on the road. I'm just trying to reach my relatives with what little I have left. He discreetly slips a heavy coin purse into the officer's hand. The officer's expression softens as he feels the gold. He pockets the purse and waves him through. Get in, but don't cause trouble. It's a dangerous time to lose your head. Thank you, sir. Victor and his attendant slip past the checkpoint behind the supply wagons. Inside, the atmosphere is even heavier. The streets are quiet, shops are shuttered, and soldiers outnumber civilians. A real paradise for anyone who hates shopping. Sir, the attendant whispers, should we head to the Sun Palace and reveal ourselves to Marshal Robert? Victor shakes his head. He stares at the Sun Palace tower with a cold, knowing smile. No rush, Victor says. Robert is desperate and frantic. If we show up now, he'll just extort us. He points to a rundown inn called the Old Oak. We stay there. The inn offers a perfect vantage point of the northern wall. Victor watches from his window as laborers, driven by whips, fortify the walls with stones, Greek fire, and ballistae. The Medici wealth is staggering, he notes. Duke Russell's orders were clear. The East must bet on the winner. If the North wins, the East will side with them to carve up the royal territory. If Robert holds the capital, the East will arrive as loyalists. They will bring an army to support the marshal and negotiate a high price. I need to see for myself, Victor says, sipping cheap ale. I want to see if Medici gold can stop the northern wolves. If Robert falters during the siege, the Eastern Army will deliver the final blow. If he shows resilience, then we talk. He toasts the city. Let us enjoy the show. Meanwhile, in the West, Spring City is bustling. Refugees are proving highly productive now that they have land. The city is recovering, and new water-powered workshops are being built. The army has been reorganized. The remnants of the garrison legion have been integrated with the obsidian iron cavalry. It is time. I stand on the training grounds and make my decision. I suppose standing around looking heroic is only half the battle. I cannot stay here. Lin and Lucius are waiting in Thorn City. As the leader of the Western Rebellion, I must reach the capital. Buck, Wolfgang, I call out. Here, they respond. Ready 100 elite obsidian iron cavalry, 3 horses each. We ride for Thorn City. Yes, a massive army isn't needed for a political center. It would only signal distrust. 100 elites, plus myself and my 2 masters, are sufficient for any situation. As I mount my horse, I hear footsteps behind me. My father, Marquis Leon Black, approaches with several senior officers. Leon is wearing new mithril-adorned heavy armor crafted by Master Glenn. Despite his bandaged shoulder and pale face, his battlefield presence is stronger than ever. Father, I was surprised. I had intended for Leon to remain in Spring City or Obsidian territory to recover from his injuries and oversee training. Leon, however, was resolute. I'm going too, he stated, cutting off my protests about his health and the long journey to Thorn City. Leon looked at his son, now taller and more prestigious than himself, with a deep, solemn gaze. Eli, do you think I'm going to Thorn City just to watch? Leon asked. I was taken aback. Leon sighed. You've achieved great military success. Since the Valley of Winds, your name is a legend in the Western Border Army. But, Leon shifted his tone. Don't forget, the Black family are outsiders here. We may be old nobility in the capital, but in the West, the LaRoche family are the true masters. I know Lucius LaRoche. He is a politician who values order and balance above all else. Leon tapped his saddle rhythmically. You hold great power and prestige. If you arrive at Thorn City alone with your elite troops, even if your intent is loyalty to the local lords and Lucius, it will be seen as a show of force or a lack of respect for protocol. I felt a chill. I had focused on military security but neglected the delicate political landscape, which is apparently just as dangerous as a battlefield, only with more uncomfortable chairs. Even with Lucius as an uncle, any misunderstanding in these sensitive times could sow dangerous seeds of distrust. So, we must go, Leon said, adjusting his armor with determination. And we must go with the utmost humility. I will take my old subordinates and the remnants of the capital garrison with me. I will swear our loyalty to Governor Lucius and the Queen in front of every noble in the West. Leon adjusted my cloak. This isn't just for our safety or to ease Lucius's mind. It is to pave the final path for you in this exclusionary circle. I want them to know the Black family are soldiers who respect the rules, not land grabbers. Only then can you truly integrate into the West and stand firm in the coming chaos. I was deeply moved as I looked at my graying father. Despite his physical decline and lost status, Leon was still using his wisdom and dignity to shield his son, mostly from the consequences of my own questionable life choices. Father, I understand, I said, bowing deeply. Lead the way. Leon smiled, mounted his horse with practiced ease, and commanded, Move out. The small, elite force of 2 generations of the Black family cut through the wind and snow like a drawn sword. They galloped toward the heart of the West, Thorn City. In the royal capital Orlandia, the final battle for the city erupted in the dark hour before dawn. A biting wind tore through the silence as the night faded. On the northern horizon, a vast black tide appeared, the Northern Revenge Army. They lacked the rigid formations and colorful banners of the Royal Army. They were like ghosts from the permafrost, clad in furs and wielding battle axes, silently occupying the horizon. There were no negotiations or messengers. Duke Winston of the North sat atop his giant white wolf, staring coldly at the towering city. With ice in his beard and a steady gaze, he raised his hand. A guard blew a mournful, tragic horn carved from mammoth ivory. Woo, woo, woo. The sound shattered the morning silence and any lingering hope. Kill. Tens of thousands of northern soldiers, eyes red with rage, charged with crude ladders and battering rams. They surged forward like a pack of wild beasts. Many were ragged and barefoot, their feet frozen purple, yet they felt nothing. Their axes were sharpened, and their hearts burned with jealousy, grief, and a desperate hunger for survival. Opposite them, the gray walls of Orlandia shone with gold. The southern garrison, clad in purple mithril armor, stood ready. Their shields and green cloaks glittered in the morning light. It was a clash of barbarism and civilization, though I've always found the line between the two is mostly just a matter of who can afford better dry cleaning. Robert Medici stood on the ramparts, calm and composed. He took a moment to adjust his pristine white gloves. He had been warned by scouts and was prepared, or rather, prepared to spend a fortune. He waved his hand. Begin. Patton, commanding the front line, understood. He drew his sword and roared at the ballistic crews. Fire. Empty the warehouses. Show these paupers the Medici way of hospitality. Boom, boom, boom. Hundreds of high-end, custom-built heavy ballistae roared in unison. The sound of the bowstrings was like the growl of a beast. Instead of steel bolts, they launched fist-sized clay jars wrapped in leather. The jars rained down in a dense arc upon the charging northern ranks. Watch out. Shields up, the northern commanders screamed. But as the jars shattered against shields and bodies, they caused no physical impact damage. Instead, they broke with a crisp sound. A pungent black liquid, smelling of sulfur and pine resin, spilled everywhere. It was hellfire oil, upgraded by alchemists. A single barrel cost more than a northern soldier earned in a lifetime. I suppose that's one way to balance the budget. The liquid was highly volatile. Upon contact with air or friction, whoosh, no torch was needed. The black liquid ignited instantly, erupting into green and orange flames several meters high. The area beneath the northern wall became a hellish sea of fire, filled with the horrific screams of burning soldiers. The alchemical oil was incredibly adhesive. It clung to leather and skin, impossible to shake off. It burned even on the frozen ground, hissing as it consumed everything. Soldiers rolled in the snow, but the fire spread through the meltwater. They became human torches, eventually collapsing into charred remains. The air filled with the nauseating stench of sulfur and roasting flesh. It was a slaughterhouse built of gold coins. It's that move, the northern veteran screamed. Scatter. It's the fire of the gray leaf forest. But the momentum of the charge made retreat impossible. The ranks were crushed together, with those behind pushing those in front into the inferno. Patton roared with excitement, ordering continuous fire. He didn't care about the cost. For the Medici, money was no object. Yet, the northern people were the toughest on the continent. After suffering thousands of casualties, they used the corpses of their comrades to pave a path through the fire. Driven by sheer ferocity, they trampled over the burning bodies and finally reached the foot of the city walls. Raise the ladders. A fortune to the first man up. Northern warriors swarmed the walls, ignoring the southern defenders' efforts to repel them. Southern captains ordered their men to thrust 5-meter reinforced pikes over the ramparts. The pikes formed a lethal forest, skewering northern soldiers as they crested the wall and tossing them into the flames below. Blood stained the stones, momentarily dampening the fire. Surprisingly, the mercenaries, usually prone to breaking, fought with fierce intensity. Robert Medici's bounty acted like a devil's whisper. 1 gold coin per kill, 10 for an officer, paid on the spot. To these cutthroats, the blood-stained northern savages were not terrifying foes. They were walking purses, breathing gold coins, and the key to a life of luxury. 10 gold coins. This beats robbery any day. A one-eyed mercenary laughed, decapitating a northern centurion with a lightning-fast strike. He grabbed the severed head like a bag of treasure, his face twisted in greedy ecstasy. Southern regulars and mercenaries alike crowded the battlements, hacking, pushing ladders, and pouring oil. Logistics officers patrolled behind the lines, tossing gold coins to anyone who proved their kill. The clinking of gold became the battlefield's most potent stimulant. This raw greed crushed the North's initial assault. leaving the base of the wall a mountain of corpses. Above, the wall was a chaotic mix of blood, gold, and screams. By the end of the first day, Orlandia was surrounded by heaps of northern dead. Amidst the stench of charred flesh, Winston stood before the ruins of his siege equipment. He stared at the imposing city, his anger cooling into a cold, hard resolve. He realized that conventional assaults, even at the cost of countless lives, were insufficient. The Medici family's golden rampart was too heavily fortified by their immense wealth. It's amazing what people will do for a pension plan that pays out in decapitations. They think gold can stop us. Winston sneered, drawing his sword. Let's see if it can buy their lives. All troops, attack at night. As darkness fell, the northern assault intensified with newfound cruelty. Slaves were driven forward as human shields, carrying only wooden planks or bundles of straw. Forced on by the Provost squad, they wailed as they charged into the kill zone. Their sole purpose was to exhaust the alchemical fire oil and fill the burning moat with their bodies. The real strike force hid within this wave of flesh. Northern nobles, clad in heavy plate and wielding hammers and axes, moved among the chaos. Like wolves, they waited for the perfect moment to strike. On the west side of the wall, northern forces detonated explosives, creating a breach. Dust and rubble filled the air. A squad of southern mercenaries stood guard, spears leveled at the swirling smoke. "Watch out! Someone's there!" a mercenary shouted. A massive figure, like a black bear, burst through the dust. It was the northern madman, Viscount Mori, the Skull Crusher. Standing 2 meters tall with bulging muscles, he wore double-layered iron armor and carried a 100-pound mace. His scarred face made him look like a beast walking on 2 legs. 2 crossbow bolts struck his shoulder and thigh. Mori didn't even flinch, ignoring the projectiles entirely. Apparently, he's too busy to notice he's becoming a pincushion. With a roar, he charged into the breach like a runaway chariot, ignoring the wall of spears. "Kill him. His head is worth 100 gold coins." A mercenary captain, seeing a fortune, ignored the danger and lunged forward. He shouted greedily, leading his men to claim the bounty. He underestimated northern strength. Mori grinned, revealing yellow teeth, and swung his massive mace. "Die!" The heavy head shattered the captain's expensive chest plate as if it were paper. The impact crushed the captain's chest, turning him and his shield into a pulp. Blood and gore sprayed onto Mori, who stood unmoved. The surrounding mercenaries froze in terror. Mori licked the blood from his lips, sneering, "Gold can't save your lives, you southern weaklings." "Kill them!" Dozens of northern guards roared, charging through the breach and slaughtering the terrified mercenaries. Meanwhile, on the east wall, a brutal battle raged. Defenders poured alchemical fire oil down the ladders, igniting them. Northern soldiers fell as human torches, but Baron Queso, the one-eyed, did not retreat. Drenched in oil and engulfed in flames, he felt no pain. He let out an inhuman roar, refusing to jump. Instead, he climbed faster, his northern savagery fueled by the agony of the fire. "Shoot him down!" the panicked crossbowman screamed, but it was too late. The burning man leaped onto the ramparts. "Die!" Queso's twin axes whirled like a cyclone. 2 crossbowmen were decapitated before they could react, a rather permanent solution to a performance review. "Stop him. Double the bounty for his head." A richly armored southern knight drew his sword, ordering his men to surround the dying madman. Queso's remaining eye burned with a madness hotter than the flames consuming him. He looked at the knight and offered a charred, terrifying smile. "Wanna kill me?" Ignoring the spears thrusting at him, he opened his arms and lunged at the knight. "Witness me!" His final, desperate roar echoed through the night. "No! Stay back!" The southern knight screamed in despair, unable to evade the suicidal, burning man. Baron Queso gripped me tight, his scorching body and flaming armor forming a lethal embrace. "I've had better dates, honestly." Then, before the horrified onlookers, Baron Queso used his final strength to lunge backward, dragging the knight with him as they plummeted from the wall. With a sickening thud, they shattered against the rocks below. "For Queso!" the northern soldiers roared. This sight ignited the northern army, their bloodlust reaching a fever pitch. A contagious madness, a total disregard for life, swept through the ranks. Fearless of fire or death, they charged the walls with bloodshot eyes. This display shattered the psychological defenses of the mercenaries. Trembling, they stared in terror at these men who seemed less than human. They were here for coin, willing to kill and take calculated risks. But they had no intention of dying alongside a burning madman. A veteran mercenary captain retreated, muttering about lunatics. This was no longer war, it was suicide. No amount of gold could buy safety against such fanatics. The fighting at the Barbican was even more brutal. Thor Olaf, Duke Winston's eldest son, displayed masterful combat skills and leadership. Ignoring the walls, he targeted the Barbican gate. Ice Wolf Guard, follow me, Thor commanded, leading 500 elite wolf cavalry. The wargs leaped over the southern shield wall, crashing directly into the center of the formation. The aerial assault shattered the southern phalanx as wargs bit and knights slashed. Thor cleaved a southern officer in two, then dismounted to carve a path through the corpses toward the Barbican ruins. Stab! He planted the blood-stained Olaf Wolf banner atop the Barbican. This act stabilized the northern offensive and struck at the heart of the royal capital. Between the suicidal assaults and Thor's breakthrough, the southern gold coin defense line cracked. Fear overcame greed. Mercenaries threw down their weapons and fled, causing a massive rout. Mercenary groups even turned their blades on each other to secure escape routes. It's comforting to know their professional integrity is as thin as their paychecks. Provost squads failed to stop the retreat. Patton Medici, watching from the rear, finally intervened. He drew his sword, Thorn of Violet, and cursed his failing troops. Violet Legion, with me. Drive these savages back. Patton was forced to lead the charge himself. The Violet Legion clashed with the Northerners, plugging the gap with sheer force. A bloody tug-of-war ensued on the narrow walls, claiming lives every second. Despite a facial wound, Patton fought on, hacking through the enemy. Eventually, the Violet Legion's superior numbers and equipment pushed Thor back, reclaiming the line. At dawn, in the Old Oak and Tower, Victor, the Eastern envoy, watched the carnage with a glass of wine. He observed the burning man, the wolf banner, and the fleeing mercenaries. A cold, amused smile played on his lips. The Medici shell is hard, but it's held together by coin, brittle and easily shattered. The Northerners are mad dogs. Even if Robert wins, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. The capital is already bleeding. The defense of Orlandia had lasted 3 days and nights. The Golden Fortress was a bottomless pit, devouring the Medici family's centuries of wealth. Alchemical fire oil and ballista bolts were consumed by the fortune every second. While Robert's gold-funded defenses held, the cost was staggering. Panic fermented within the city, fueled by shortages, the cries of the wounded, and the relentless war drums. The nobles, once celebrating the gray leaf forest victory, now tasted death. Marshal, we cannot hold like this, Patton reported. In the Sun Palace, Patton's armor was stained dark with dried blood. Our alchemical fire oil will last only 2 more days. And the mercenaries are raising their prices. Greedy vampires. Robert stared at the burning north wall. Though calm, his white-knuckled grip on the windowsill betrayed his anxiety. As a merchant, he hated losing money. This was no longer just business. It was the Medici family's life. It's time to end this. One final strike. He turned with a gambler's madness. Patton, initiate the plan. But the Barbican, the repair costs will be astronomical. I suppose my accountant would have had a stroke right about now. Forget the cost. If we win, the kingdom is ours. Break their spines. On the 4th morning, Winston, sensing the enemy's waning fire, prepared for a final push. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the north gate. A centurion rode up, ecstatic. The Barbican gate is open. Mori broke through. Winston licked his lips, sensing victory. A deafening boom echoed from the north gate, followed by chaos. Lord Mori led a suicide squad through the fog. The Barbican gate is open. Winston looked up to see the gate wide open and the drawbridge lowered. Southern troops were fleeing, and their banners were being torn down. Heaven favors us. Winston roared, drawing his sword. Charge! Take the city. Slaughter them all. Thousands of northern infantry and wolf cavalry surged toward the Barbican. The Barbican was a semicircular trap designed to be an attacker's nightmare. Blinded by the promise of victory, the Northerners ignored all tactical caution. They flooded across the drawbridge. 3,000 elite Northerners packed the narrow space. They roared, rushing the main gate to finish the siege. As the battering ram struck, a mechanical click echoed from the walls. Patton stood above, gripping the fatal lever. Looking down at the Northern soldiers packed like sardines, I wore a cruel smile. It's amazing how much effort people put into dying when you make it convenient for them. Welcome to hell. I triggered the mechanism. Rumble. The portcullis behind the barbican, powered by massive counterweights, slammed down with thunderous force. Bang! The rearmost Northern soldiers were crushed into pulp by the spiked iron gate. Their retreat was cut off. The barbican became a death trap. It's a trap. Retreat! The Northern commanders screamed, but it was too late. As they panicked, countless hidden nozzles emerged from the smooth walls. Hiss, hiss, hiss. No arrows followed. Instead, thick, pungent black liquid poured down, drenching the soldiers and pooling on the ground. It's oil. Fire oil. Desperate screams echoed. Patton didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flaming arrow from a brazier. He tossed the arrow casually into the barbican below. It traced an arc and landed in the sea of oil. Whoosh! In an instant, the entire barbican erupted into a terrifying inferno, a fire dragon consuming everything. Ah! The screams were inhuman. Thousands were burned alive in the enclosed space. The barbican had become a giant, open-air crematorium. Flames soared, and black smoke blotted out the sun. The elite Northern warriors trampled each other, slipping on the oil as they tried to climb the walls. The stench of charred flesh was so strong it spooked warhorses miles away. Outside the city, Duke Winston froze on his wolf, witnessing the sudden catastrophe. He watched the towering flames and heard the hellish cries. His elite warriors, the pride of the North, were being reduced to ash and silence. No, no. Winston turned purple, then, he vomited blood onto his wolf's mane. Duke! His guards rushed to his side. Winston swayed, looking 10 years older, filled with despair and regret. He knew it was over. I suppose that's one way to retire early. Though 50,000 troops remained, the loss of his elite corps had shattered their strength. Morale was broken. As Winston weakly gestured to retreat, his eldest son, Thor Olaf, rode up. Father, you are tired, Thor said coldly. Bang! Thor delivered a precise, brutal chop to Winston's neck. Winston collapsed, unconscious. The guards watched, unmoved. Thor tossed his father to the guards. Take him away. He turned to the restless army. Raising his battle axe, he gave the order, retreat. Burn every village on the way back. Return to the north. This was the new Wolf King's law. Cut losses and leave a scorched earth. As they retreated, a conscious Winston glared at the purple-clad Robert on the walls. Robert! Winston cursed. Rot in your city with your gold, you southern snake. You think you've won? I'll watch you die. The Northern army retreated, leaving behind corpses and wreckage. They left a trail of devastation. Orlandia was saved, but at a heavy price. The North District was in ruins. The moat was choked with corpses, the water turned dark red and foul. Worse was the economic collapse. The treasury was empty, and the Medici family's bottomless vault was drained. It turns out bottomless is just a marketing term for we spent it all. The bounties for mercenaries and supply costs were astronomical. The capital was a hollowed-out giant, standing but teetering. Money. We need money, Robert muttered, his eyes dark. Without pay, the mercenaries would turn into looters. Robert summoned Patton, his voice ruthless. List the disobedient merchant guilds and the nobles who hoarded supplies. Charge them with treason. Confiscate their wealth and grain for the army. Patton left, eager for the task. Publicly, Robert remained the hero who saved the city. At dusk, he donned his marshal's uniform. Robert stood atop the ruined wall. Below, thousands cheered. My people, Robert shouted, radiating arrogance. We have won. The barbarians are defeated. Orlandia shall never fall. Long live the Medici. Robert basked in the cheers, looking over his ruined city. His heart bled for the lost gold, but he smiled. The crown was finally secure in the Medici family's hands. It was expensive, but worth it. Thorn City, capital of the West. The ancient city stood in the snow, its gray walls like a silver-clad giant. 2 guards at the west gate huddled against the cold. Despite the independence and war footing, the recent calm had dulled their senses. "Look, what is that?" One pointed to the horizon. A massive force was breaking through the snowstorm toward the gate. The thunder of hooves shattered the silence. At the front, a black flag with a silver dragon snapped in the wind. The fierce dragon totem radiated an overwhelming presence. "The black dragon flag. It's the Obsidian territory," the guard shouted, trembling. "Captain, it's Viscount Eli. Viscount Eli has returned. It's him, the Kingdom Knight." The captain rushed over, grabbing the telescope. Seeing the familiar banner and the silver-clad figure atop a tall horse, my face lit up with ecstasy. "It's nice to be popular, though I'm mostly just here for the heating." "Sound the horns," the captain roared, his voice trembling with excitement. "Open the gates. Welcome them with the highest honors. And send word to Lucius at La Roche Fortress. Tell him Lord Eli has returned." Solemn horns echoed as the Thorn City West Gate groaned open. As the drawbridge fell, citizens braved the cold, flooding the streets. They crowded the thoroughfares, clutching dried flowers, ribbons, and fresh bread, desperate for a glimpse of the legendary god of war. As I and my 100 obsidian iron cavalry entered, the city erupted. "Eli, long live the West. Long live the Queen." Flowers rained down, carpeting the path. Riding my steed, I looked at the fervent crowd, my stern expression softening into a gentle smile. I waved, drawing even louder cheers. "It's amazing how much people love you when you're currently winning." Behind me, Marquis Leon Black surveyed the capital of the West with a complex gaze. As a former commander of the capital garrison, Leon had seen royal processions, but Thorn City felt entirely different. Given the war, the northern threat, and the West's status as rebels, the atmosphere should have been one of despair. Instead, he witnessed the exact opposite. There was no fear in the eyes of the citizens, only a fanatical confidence. They hailed me as an undefeated god and the Queen as a savior. "Is this public sentiment?" Leon marveled. The sheer unity of the people left the veteran soldier shaken. Leon tightened his grip on the reins, his posture straightening instinctively. The procession reached the city center, La Roche Fortress. The former stronghold now served as the administrative hub and residence for Queen Lin. A red carpet led to the steps where Lucius, the governor, stood in a fur cloak, flanked by high-ranking nobles and generals. Seeing this high-level welcome, I dismounted and approached, hand over my heart. "Lord Lucius, I have returned." Lucius studied the young man, noting his weary but sharp, resolute eyes. A sincere smile broke across his stern face. He gripped my shoulders firmly. "Good. You're back. The West cannot do without you." Marquis Leon and his men dismounted nearby. Leon looked at his old rival with complicated emotions. He was no longer a powerful marquis of the capital, but a defeated general seeking refuge. As Leon moved to kneel, Lucius caught his arms, stopping him. "Marquis Leon, what are you doing?" Lucius looked at Leon's white hair and unhealed wounds with deep respect. "If not for your desperate stand at the Valley of Winds, the Western Army could never have retreated safely. You are a hero, not a criminal." Lucius turned to the wary Western nobles. "Eli is my nephew, and Lin is his wife. Our families are bound by blood." He turned back to Leon, gripping his calloused hand. "You are family now. I need your expertise to secure the Western defenses." The declaration effectively erased the stigma of the Black family as outsiders, which was a relief, considering my family's track record for making friends is usually limited to people who want to kill us. Leon trembled, his throat tight, and he nodded heavily. "I will give my all." 2 old men, once distant, were now united by a common enemy and their children's bond. After the formalities, Lucius turned back to me. He looked me over with the affection of an elder. "Business can wait," Lucius waved. "I have military matters to discuss with your father and the generals, and we must celebrate your return." He gestured toward the fortress. "Go see Lin. She needs you. Don't keep her waiting. We will discuss strategy tonight." I nodded, feeling a surge of warmth. "Understood, Lord Lucius." I turned to Buck. "Follow the steward and get the men settled in the barracks." "Yes, my lord." Guided by a maid, I walked through the corridors toward my destination. The Queen's chambers on the top floor. The maid bowed silently and opened the heavy carved doors. The room was warm, but the figure by the window looked lonely. Lynn, the Queen of Orlando, stood with her back to the door. She held a document, her shoulders trembling slightly. Hearing the door, she didn't turn. "Uncle Lucius?" I said, "I'm not hungry." No reply came, only familiar, steady footsteps. Her quill stopped midair. Recognizing that presence, she spun around, knocking over an inkwell. It clattered to the floor. She stared, wide-eyed, at the man standing in the doorway, dusty but smiling. "Eli." Her voice broke, tears blurring her vision. She had been forced to wear the heavy crown of thorns. She had to act as the strong, decisive queen. She faced the scrutiny of nobles and the weight of her husband's life hanging in the balance. She was exhausted. I opened my arms. "I'm back." The dam broke. She rushed into my arms like a wronged child. She sobbed. Her facade crumbled as she buried her face in my chest. Her tears soaked my clothes. "You're finally back?" I was so scared. I was afraid I couldn't be a good queen. I was afraid you wouldn't return. I felt her trembling and was filled with pity. I stroked her golden hair, soothing her frayed nerves. "It's a good thing I don't mind smelling like a swamp, given the state of my travel clothes." "It's over," I whispered. "You've done better than I ever imagined. You are the best queen." I listened patiently as she poured out her fears, pressures, and longing. Lynn's sobbing eventually faded. I pulled her back, wiped her tears, and presented a simple mithril ring, forged by Master Glenn in the Obsidian Territory, engraved with our names. I placed it on her finger, promising to clear all obstacles and reclaim the world for her. Lynn smiled, and we embraced on the bed, finding solace in the chaotic night. We confirmed our bond through a simple, primal intimacy, seeking comfort in each other's presence. The black dragon returned to his nest to guard his treasure, while the night in the west had only just begun. Inside the queen's chambers at La Roche Fortress, the night flowed silently over Thorn City. Outside, the wind and snow quieted to a soft, rhythmic patter against the window panes. Within the room, the fireplace had dimmed to glowing embers, casting a faint, fading heat. The air remained heavy with the lingering, warm scent of our recent, intense reunion. It was a comforting, languid blend of sweat, body heat, and a faint trace of lavender. Lynn, now Queen of Orlando, lay curled in the tangled covers of the massive carved bed, her platinum hair spread like waves across the pillows. Her beautiful face still bore a faint flush and traces of dried tears. Yet, a subtle smile played on her lips. For days, she had played the role of the iron-willed queen, her nerves stretched to their limit. Only in my arms could she finally shed her defenses and fall into a deep sleep. I sat up, watching her with profound tenderness and pity. I tucked the blanket around her, my fingertips brushing her porcelain skin. I then stepped barefoot onto the carpet and walked to the window table. By the moonlight, I poured a glass of water and drank. The cold liquid cooled my body and cleared my mind from the heat of our passion. Standing at the window, I watched Thorn City. I knew I couldn't fully relax yet. A rhythmic, threefold knock sounded at the door. Only one person in the city dared disturb the queen's chambers at this hour, and he usually had the social grace of a battering ram. A servant's hushed, apologetic voice came from outside. "Viscount Eli. Apologies for the intrusion. Lord Lucius requests your presence." I was not surprised. I set down my glass, checked that Lynn was still asleep, and replied, "Understood. Wait a moment." I dressed quickly, opting for a simple black velvet robe instead of formal aristocratic attire. It's hard to look imposing when you're essentially wearing a glorified blanket, but it beat wrestling with a corset. After one last look at Lynn, I slipped out and closed the heavy door. The study at La Roche Fortress served as the power center of the western border. I walked through the quiet, lamplit corridor to the familiar oak doors. Lights spilled from the cracks. The occupant was also sleepless. I straightened my collar, took a breath, and knocked. "Enter." Lucius stood before a massive map of the West, wine in hand. As we locked eyes, we shared a silent, weary smile of mutual respect. "It seems you aren't worn out yet." Lucius broke the silence with a light-hearted jab that bridged the gap between us. He poured me a glass of wine from a decanter. "Taste this. It's a tribute wine from the late king 20 years ago. I've been saving it. Tonight, We celebrate our queen's return and your triumph. I bowed slightly. Thank you, Lord Lucius. Lucius waved off the formality. We sat in the lounge area. Lucius looked at the matured young man with deep emotion. Honestly, Eli, Lucius said earnestly, I only sent you to the royal capital for experience. I only hoped you'd survive. I never imagined you would achieve so much. Winning the tournament, the decisive actions at the bloodwedding, the rearguard defense at the Valley of Winds. Lucius gestured toward the window. You even brought the remnants of the Blake family, their supplies, and a terrifying cavalry unit back to the west right under Robert's nose. Eli, Lucius raised his glass. You are far more exceptional than I imagined. I smiled modestly and sipped my wine. I merely adapted to the circumstances, Lord Lucius. I did what I had to for survival and to protect those I love. At the mention of protecting my loved ones, the atmosphere grew heavy. The topic turned to Lynn, or rather, Isla. Lucius set his glass down, his expression complex and tinged with guilt. About Isla, Lucius sighed. Eli, I owe you and her an apology. He began to recount the events of the past few days. He explained how he had manipulated the situation, using the suffering outside the city to stir the girl's conscience, leveraging duty and redemption. He had forced a girl who only wanted a simple life onto a cold, thorny throne. I know it was cruel, Lucius pleaded. She could have been a carefree lady under your protection, but I pushed her into the spotlight as a target for every ambitious person in the world. But understand, Eli, for the West to survive and counter the royal capital's legitimacy, we needed this banner. Without her, we are rebels. With her, we are a righteous army. Don't blame me, Eli. I hope you don't harbor resentment because I turned your wife into a queen. The game of power has no turning back. This was Lucius's greatest fear. He worried that a man might feel a psychological divide if his wife became a superior monarch. It's a touching concern, really, assuming I have the ego to be threatened by her success. Any rift between me and Lynn would be fatal to the future of the West. I listened, sensing the elder's struggle. I finished my wine in one gulp. Uncle, you worry too much, I said firmly. She is the queen, yes. But before that, she is my wife. A warm smile touched my lips as I thought of her. No matter her position, whether on a throne or on a muddy battlefield, I will stand before her as her sharpest sword and her sturdiest shield. Isn't that what you expected? Lucius was stunned, then moved. He realized I had chosen to bear this burden for the greater good. Good. Good lad. Lucius poured another drink. Now that family matters are settled, let's talk business. Lucius's expression turned cold, his authoritative demeanor returning. The conversation shifted to the state of the world. Lucius stood and retrieved a top-secret document, still sealed with wax, from a pile of files. Take this. He handed it to me. This is the detailed account of the defense of the royal capital, sent by our agents at the cost of their lives. I took the report and scanned it. The contents were shocking. The North's assault, the fire oil tactics, the trap at the gate, and the brutal cremation, Robert won, Lucius sneered. His tone was dripping with mockery. The Medici family is hailing it as a glorious victory and a golden miracle. Robert is the savior of the capital, but look, Lucius pointed at the map. What did he pay to stop those mad dogs from the north? The northern district is ruined, the moat is filled with corpses, and plague looms. Lucius looked at me. He is broke. To pay the mercenaries and buy supplies, the Medici family has likely drained their coffers. The capital looks grand, but it is hollow. They began to analyze the situation. The north retreated, Lucius noted, but Thor Olaf has seized power as the new Wolf King. He and Robert share a blood feud. The seeds of hatred are sown. True, I agreed. The north is a distraction, but it ties up the capital's strength. And the east? I asked. Russell is still watching, Lucius scoffed. They won't commit until the outcome is clear. Robert is a gambler, Lucius analyzed. He faces internal strife. No money for mercenaries and riots from displaced refugees. He needs a new war to divert attention and plunder wealth to fill his deficit. I suppose nothing says fiscal responsibility quite like starting a fresh conflict. Lucius gestured toward the vast western territory. We declared independence and crowned a new king. To Robert, we are the perfect target. Defeating us solves his legal issues and grants him our mines and wealth. He will come, I said, my eyes sharp. And soon. He thinks we are soft, weakened by our recent transition. Their eyes met on a specific point on the map. It was Silver Bell Castle, the strategic gateway between the West and the royal territory. Since he wants to come, I smiled coldly, radiating the confidence of one who had survived hell. We will show him that the iron of the West is harder than his gold. The biting wind carried rumors faster than the snow. Taverns, trade routes, and ports became hubs of frantic gossip. News of the capital's carnage spread like a plague, devouring the people's sense of security. The moat is dry. It's filled with feet of bone ash, not mud. In a southern port tavern, a dim lamp flickered. A merchant, trembling, clutched a cup of cheap rum to suppress his terror. With bloodshot eyes, he recounted the hellish night to the crowd. Fire. Black fire oil that burns on water and melts stone. I saw a man burned to charcoal in the river. Bards plucked their strings softly, fearing to invoke the horror. They sang of how the Medici family melted the northern steel tide with mountains of gold. Orlandia's once prosperous northern district was now a scorched hellscape. They trapped thousands in the gatehouse and burned them alive. The screams were deafening. People whispered in fear, the clinking of glasses sounding jarringly sharp. They were shocked by the cruelty of the Medici, who had traded their refined image for ruthless slaughter. Every conversation converged on one unspoken question: who really rules this kingdom? Central Plaza, Orlandia. Once a place of celebration, it now reeked of blood, the stones stained dark red. Terrified citizens crowded around a massive notice board. Southern soldiers in mithril armor shoved the crowd aside. They posted a harsh decree stamped with the royal seal. It was Robert's attempt to restore his image in the name of King Aiden Aurora. By royal decree, an officer stood on a platform, shouting, "Winston Olaf, the traitor, has been punished. Thanks to the king's army and Marshal Robert, the rebel force is destroyed. The traitor Winston is executed." The officer pointed to the gatehouse. A severed, weathered head hung in the wind, its empty sockets staring at the land he once sought to conquer. The officer's voice boomed. Winston had actually been killed by his son, Thor. Thor had surrendered his father's body to Robert to appease the North and close the chapter on the failed war. Robert used this to stage a glorious execution to intimidate the populace, because nothing says stability like a public display of parental betrayal. Listen, the officer's gaze cut through the crowd, forcing heads to bow. King Aiden Aurora is the only sacred, legitimate monarch. Anyone questioning royal power or colluding with the false king in the West will be branded a traitor. Your fate will be the same: execution, and your head hung on these gates. Silence fell. Thousands stood frozen, terrified by the naked threat. This reign of terror suppressed talk of the drained treasury, but it chilled the hearts of the minor nobility. Looking at the head on the wall, they wondered, would they be next? It's a great way to ensure nobody asks for a raise, I suppose. In Golden Spike City, a neutral trade hub between the south and the center, news travels fast, far from the front lines. Despite the royal capital's strict bans, underground casinos and secret salons remain active. Discussions regarding the War of the Two Kings have intensified, with gamblers even betting on who will survive the winter. People constantly compare the two power centers, the East and the West. The East, the royal capital Orlandia, holds centuries of legitimacy, vast wealth, and is controlled by the ruthless viper Robert Medici, who manipulates the puppet king. It represents the old order, defined by money, intrigue, and absolute oppression. The West is centered at Thorn City. It is home to Lynn, the mysterious queen with the purest royal bloodline. It also boasts the legendary god of war, I, and the formidable Western Iron Cavalry. This represents a new force, a fusion of blood and steel, symbolizing resistance and hope. It is a war between merchants and knights. A drunken scholar in a tavern shouted. One side wants to buy the crown, the other wants to seize it back. One uses gold to crush, the other uses swords to pierce. Historians and critics have begun calling this the era of two kings. Everyone is placing their bets. Will the omnipotent gold buy the crown, or will noble blood, protected by iron knights, Restore the glory of the Aurora family? Days after the capital's threats, the world shifted at dawn. An announcement from Thorn City spread rapidly via merchant caravans, carrier pigeons, and my intelligence network. Overnight, the notice appeared on city walls, boards, and church doors across the kingdom, drawing curious and fearful crowds. They expected a retort or a bloody report detailing the capital's crimes. They were wrong. The notice contained no insults, threats, or mentions of war. It was an elegant, confident, and fragrant invitation written on high-quality parchment. Winter ends, and all things revive. The calligraphy was powerful, carrying a warmth that could melt the coldest hearts. Princess Lynn Aurora, daughter of the late King August and rightful heir, will hold her coronation at Thorn Cathedral this spring. This is the dawn of a new order. No gates will be locked, no checkpoints set. All children of Orlando, noble or commoner, are invited to witness the Queen welcoming her people home. The impact of this invitation was 100 times greater than Robert's death warrants. To openly invite the world while labeled a rebel during wartime? It's a bold strategy, assuming you don't mind the inevitable guest list of spies and disgruntled tax collectors. It proved the West's absolute confidence in its security, unafraid of assassins or the Southern Army, and its ability to protect all who attend. While Robert kills and threatens, treating everyone as a traitor, Lynn invites and embraces, treating everyone as family. Even the dullest farmer could see which side acted like a true ruler. The public sentiment shifted instantly. Go to the West. See the true Queen. That is our hope. Even if I die on the road, I must see the new era. People finally understood the deeper meaning behind the invitation. It meant that when spring arrives and the ice melts, the West will officially assert its sovereignty and launch its final offensive. Amidst the falling snow, on a weathered wall, a blood-red royal warrant and the fragrant Western invitation were posted side by side. The cold wind tore at the warrant, making it look ragged and menacing. The invitation, however, snapped in the wind like a raised battle flag, summoning warriors from afar. The entire kingdom held its breath, waiting for the first thunder of spring to shatter the rotting winter. Royal capital Orlandia, Sun Palace. In the marshal's study, the parchment from the West lay on the mahogany table. Every word felt like a red-hot needle piercing Robert's eyes. Coronation in spring, Robert whispered, his usually composed face turning ashen. His cheek muscles twitched with rage and anxiety. Crack! He hurled his priceless crystal goblet against the wall, shattering it. It's always the expensive glassware that pays the price for his poor mood. Red wine dripped down like a bloody scar. Lynn's coronation was more than a provocation. It was a total negation of his regent legitimacy. If Lynn crowned herself, the puppet King Aidan would become a fake, and Robert would be exposed as a usurper. He would instantly become a target for everyone. That woman, that Western mongrel. Robert gripped the table, chest heaving. His first instinct was to march his army to raze Thorn City, but reason prevailed. The capital had just survived a brutal siege. The Violet Legion was depleted, mercenaries had fled with their pay, and defenses and supplies were exhausted. The capital's army was like a marathon runner with no strength left. A new expedition was impossible. Robert suppressed his rage, his eyes turning cold and venomous. No frontal assault for now, he muttered, tapping the table. He rang a bell, and a secret door opened. A man in gray, silent as a snake, emerged, the leader of the Medici death squads, codenamed Viper. Robert threw a heavy black bag and a map of Thorn City to Viper. Go to Thorn City, Robert commanded, his voice dripping with malice. Kill that queen during the coronation, in front of everyone. The bag contained tears of the goddess, a lethal poison purchased at a high price. If you kill me too, Robert added, I will grant you a count's title and a gold mine in the south. Greed flickered in Viper's dead eyes. As you wish, master. He vanished into the shadows. After the arrangements, Robert straightened his collar, regaining his dignified martial persona. Because nothing says dignified like planning a public assassination before lunch. Guards, he ordered. Summon all the great nobles in the capital to the Great Council Hall immediately. I have urgent matters to discuss. Half an hour later, the royal capital's Grand Council chamber was packed with hundreds of nobles, ranging from southern loyalists to neutral royal territory veterans. Robert sat in the regent's chair, suppressing his rage as he flung the Western Borders Declaration before the assembly. The meeting descended into chaos immediately. The declaration acted like water in hot oil, causing the nobles to erupt in uproar. Attack! We must attack! A radical southern count jumped up, shouting that the declaration was an insult to the Medici family and demanding an immediate campaign to restore order. Attack? With what? The Restoration faction, mostly royal territory nobles drained by the northern siege, shouted him down. They had lost their private soldiers to the war and were already harboring deep resentment. An elderly marquis, missing an arm, sneered. Marshal, war requires money. Is there any left in the treasury? Our men are dead. Do you want us to send more? Are we to fill the western abyss with our own lives? The hall filled with complaints and laments. Beneath the noise, a dangerous undercurrent emerged. Perhaps we should negotiate with Thorn City? A whisper in the corner cut through the tension. After all, Lady Lin is of the Aurora bloodline. If she proves her identity, why should we fight? Traitor, the southern nobles roared. The neutral faction retorted. Who is the legitimate ruler is still in question. The debate devolved into a shouting match. The Southerners accused the neutrals of cowardice during the siege. The neutrals blamed Robert's poor command for the capital's ruin and hinted at Medici embezzlement. My son died on those walls. And you're still a Southern upstart. The atmosphere grew explosive. Two rival counts drew their swords, threatening a duel right in the council chamber. As metal clashed, Robert watched coldly, feeling his heart turn to ice. He realized the fear and authority he had built through wealth and power were rapidly evaporating. Their audacity in drawing weapons proved they no longer respected him. They saw him as a toothless viper, broke and incapable of handling the West. It's amazing how quickly people stop fearing you once the gold runs out and the bills start piling up. Humiliated, Robert exploded, slamming his fist onto the table and shattering an ink bottle. Enough! His battle-chi-infused roar silenced the room. Standing on the dais, eyes bloodshot, he glared at the nobles. This is a council, not a marketplace. Whoever draws a sword again goes to the dungeon. The nobles sheepishly sheathed their weapons. Robert took a breath, preparing to reassert his dominance. A rhythmic, urgent knocking echoed at the oak doors. Before Robert could react, the doors opened, revealing a scout in dark green leather armor bearing a pure gold emblem. It was a family emblem messenger, the most secret of agents, serving only the head of the Medici family. Seeing him, Robert's harsh words died in his throat. His eyelid twitched. The messenger ignored the nobles and knelt before the dais. He spoke in a calm, clear voice. Marshal Robert, your father, Duke Harkson Medici, has left Lorendale with the family core. He will arrive at the capital in 3 days. A deathly silence fell over the room. The nobles froze at the mention of Lorendale and Duke Harkson. Their faces shifted from anger to profound awe and terror. Robert was seen as a wealthy upstart, but his father was a different beast. They feared Robert for his blade and coin, but they feared Harkson for his soul. Harkson was a commercial emperor who once controlled the kingdom's grain prices with a single word. Robert was a small snake. Harkson was the old viper coiled upon a mountain of gold. Robert collapsed into his chair. He felt no joy, only complex dread. He knew his father's arrival meant his failure to control the situation had disappointed the family. The true helmsman was coming to take over the sinking ship. In the silence, everyone seemed to hear the heavy footsteps of the Duke approaching from the south. They knew the man who could crush them all was coming. Sun Palace, council chamber. As the messenger left, the tension in the room vanished, replaced by panic. The arrogant nobles turned pale, eyes darting nervously. They exchanged glances as if the Duke's name were a death sentence. Forgetting etiquette, they fled like frightened birds. To them, Harkson was more terrifying than the northern wolves. He didn't just want their wealth, he wanted their roots. A great reckoning was coming, and everyone rushed to cover their tracks. They scrambled to destroy incriminating accounts and letters. Robert was left alone in the hall. He slumped in the marshal's chair, feeling utterly drained. The chair felt like a crushing weight. "Father," he muttered, then panic struck him. He bolted upright. Disheveled, he ran like a madman toward the royal treasury. He kicked the heavy oak doors open with a crash. He ignored the stunned clerks inside. He rushed to the massive filing cabinets, hands flailing. He dragged out all the year's expense records, IOUs, and unpaid bounty claims. Where is it? Why is there so much? He knelt, frantically flipping through the heavy ledgers. The endless mercenary bounties, the astronomical costs for alchemical fire oil, the kickbacks for wall repairs, and his lavish banquets. Every number felt like a dagger. 3 million gold. 5 million. No, this is impossible. Looking at the staggering deficit, which had drained half the Medici fortune, I briefly wondered if I could pivot to a career in professional begging. Robert trembled, cold sweat soaking his clothes. He remembered his father's words. The Medici family does not keep useless losers. No, I can't let him see this. He'll kill me. He'll definitely kill me. A flash of despair crossed Robert's eyes. He grabbed the burning silver candelabra from the table, ready to hurl it onto the pile of scattered ledgers. Burn them. Once they're burned, there will be no evidence. I'll just say they were destroyed in the fires of war. Just as the flames were about to lick the paper, a large, powerful hand, like an iron pincer, clamped down on his wrist, rendering him unable to move. That's enough, Robert. Patton Medici had appeared behind him at some point. The battle-hardened general, fresh from the front lines, looked at his hysterical nephew with a gaze filled with deep disappointment and a sigh. With a slight exertion of force, he snatched the candelabra from Robert's hand and tossed it aside. The flame flickered twice on the cold floor before extinguishing. It's useless. Patton looked at the ledgers scattered across the floor, covered in dense red ink, and said coldly, "Do you think the accountants and auditors in the family treasury are just for show? Do you think there is any secret in this world that can escape the eyes of the iron vault? Robert, every gold coin you spend in the royal capital, every IOU you signed, even every bribe, Laurendale has a copy of it all. Messenger ravens fly between the two places every day. That is the rule of the vault and the cornerstone upon which the Medici family stands." Patton released his grip and straightened Robert's disheveled collar. His movements were gentle, yet carried the severity of an elder frustrated by a younger generation's failure to live up to expectations. Burning these won't cover the deficit. It will only make you look more guilty and incompetent. Don't let your father look down on you even more. These words were like a bucket of ice water, completely extinguishing the frantic fire in Robert's heart and plunging him instantly into a frozen cellar. Robert stopped struggling. He leaned against the bookshelf, his body slowly sliding down until he sat slumped on the floor, utterly undignified, his eyes hollow. Despair. Deep, profound despair. He knew his father too well. In the eyes of Duke Harkson, there were only two types of people, those with value and useless trash. If he were to see this mess, to see this massive deficit with no return, to see that he hadn't just failed to control the royal capital, but had instead dragged the family into a quagmire. Robert clutched his head, his nails digging deep into his scalp, and let out a stifled sob. But gradually, the trembling of despair ceased. He lifted his head, and in those bloodshot eyes, the initial fear began to fade, replaced by a ruthless edge. Like a gambler who had lost everything and was staring at his final trump card. There's still a chance. Robert's voice was hoarse, as if squeezed from his throat, carrying a scent of blood. He thought of one person, the top-tier assassin he had already dispatched to Thorn City in the western border, the Viper. Yes, as long as the Viper succeeds. Robert stood up unsteadily and began to mutter to himself neurotically, addressing the empty palace, addressing the air. It's a bold strategy, talking to the furniture. I'm sure the curtains are very sympathetic. It was as if he were trying to convince himself, or perhaps praying to fate. As long as I can kill that so-called Queen Lynn before father arrives, or even kill that damn eye, I can solve the biggest problem in the western border. I can prove I have the ability to fix things. I can turn this losing game around. His eyes grew brighter, the madness of a gambler placing his final chip. As long as the result is good, the process doesn't matter. How much money was spent doesn't matter either. Father only cares about results. This became his last straw, keeping him from completely collapsing under the looming shadow of his father. The third day at dusk. Orlandia, Southgate. The weather today was exceptionally gloomy. Low-hanging dark clouds pressed down on the city walls, as if they might collapse at any moment and crush the city. Unlike the grand spectacles Robert usually favored, flowers strewn on the ground, endless red carpets, and blaring horns. This time, the welcoming ceremony was deathly quiet. On this day, the entire southern district was completely cleared. Shops along the streets were all shuttered, and all citizens were strictly ordered to stay indoors, not even allowed to open their windows. Guards patrolled the street corners, and anyone daring to peek out was met with harsh reprimands or even lashes. The wide boulevard was empty, with only the cold wind swirling dead leaves across the ground, making a rustling sound. Clop, clop, clop. A rhythmic and dull sound of hooves slowly approached from outside the city gate. The sound was not loud, lacking the frantic tempo of a charge, yet each strike was precise and powerful, knocking against the heart of every person waiting. It made their hearts beat involuntarily to that rhythm. A troop, not particularly large but equipped with the finest gear and an aura as cold as iron, slowly entered the gate. There were 500 knights, all riding black warhorses of pure, superior bloodline. The knights in the saddles wore dark gold full-plate armor, not for aesthetics, but for ultimate defense. They wore featureless golden masks, leaving only a narrow slit for observation, cold and merciless. On their chests was engraved the Medici family crest, a viper coiled around a massive gold coin. They made no noise, no conversation. Only the uniform sound of hooves echoed through the deathly silent streets. This was the true foundation of the Medici family, and the trump card in the hands of Duke Harksun, the Iron Vault Guard. It was said that every member of this guard was built with enough gold coins to buy a small city. I suppose that's one way to ensure your employees don't quit. They answered only to the head of the family. Even the king's orders were like waste paper to them. At the city gate, Robert, accompanied by Patton and a group of high-ranking officials from the Southern Territory faction, stood respectfully in the cold wind, dressed in their most formal and decent attire. Despite the biting cold, Robert's forehead was covered in a fine layer of cold sweat. The procession slowly came to a halt. In the center of the guard, a carriage, not overly decorated, entirely black, but crafted from the most exquisite materials, stopped steadily before Robert. The 4 horses pulling the carriage were the extremely rare Black Nightmare horses, each worth a fortune, their breath carrying a faint scent of sulfur. Robert lowered his head, bowing at a 90-degree angle, not even daring to look up at the carriage. "Father," he called out with a trembling voice, filled with humility and supplication. However, the carriage door did not open. Not even a corner of the gold-threaded curtains was lifted. Only those eyes behind the golden mask stared coldly at this so-called kingdom marshal. Time ticked by, second by second. This silent stillness was more agonizing than the most vicious curse. Robert felt his legs trembling. His heart felt as if it were being gripped in a hand, ready to be crushed at any moment. Every second of waiting ground away a little more of his dignity as marshal. After a long while, a weary, aged sigh finally emerged from the carriage. Sigh. Then, the voice spoke again. It was flat, low, devoid of joy or anger, yet carried an unquestionable, absolute authority. "Return to the Sun Palace," the voice said. "Go and wipe that chair belonging to the king clean. I don't like dust on it." Robert shuddered, his face turning deathly pale. "And, tomorrow, have all the old fogies in the royal capital, I mean, the true heads of the families, come to the Sun Palace for a meeting. Tell them Harksun invites them for tea." With that, the carriage fell silent again. But these 2 simple sentences were like an invisible imperial decree, stripping Robert of all his qualifications as marshal. Wiping a chair, that was a servant's job. Inviting the old heads to a meeting, that was the power of the patriarch. In front of Harksun, the prestige Robert had painstakingly built collapsed instantly. He was reduced to his original form, back to being a son and servant who could only follow orders. Robert gritted his teeth, burying his head lower to hide the humiliation, fear, and a trace of resentment he dared not show. "Yes, father," he replied in a whisper, his voice humble to the point of being in the dust. Clop, clop, clop. The wheels rolled. The carriage drove slowly past Robert toward the Sun Palace, without a moment's pause. The iron vault guard stared straight ahead, following the carriage like a black tide washing over the street, leaving Robert behind, all alone. Robert straightened his stiff back, watching the carriage depart, his fists clenched so tightly his nails pierced his palms. He had no right to board the carriage. He could only walk behind it like an attendant, step by step, toward the palace where he had once issued commands. And behind the tightly closed windows along the street, countless eyes peered through the gaps, watching this scene in shock. Watching Marshal Robert, who just days ago had been invincible and hailed as the savior, now following a carriage like a stray dog, not even daring to breathe loudly. It's a bold career pivot, I'll give him that. The undercurrents surged more violently than ever. Everyone realized the sky over the royal capital was changing again. Sun Palace, Great Council Hall. This hall, which had witnessed countless heated arguments and nearly seen sword duels, was now plunged into a deathly silence. Hundreds of high nobles of the royal territory, heads of various families, and armored generals all kept their heads bowed, not daring to breathe. Their eyes occasionally darted toward the tightly closed carved doors. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of hardwood striking marble, steady and unhurried. The doors slid open slowly. There were no loud announcements from guards, no cumbersome honor guards. An old man with a full head of silver hair, aged but standing as straight as a pine, walked in slowly. He did not wear the armor symbolizing power or the gold-threaded ducal robes, but a simple, exquisitely tailored robe of fine black silk. He leaned on a polished, jet-black ebony cane. At the top of the cane was set an inconspicuous but priceless black pearl. Harksun Medici. This name, for the past 40 years, had been synonymous with wealth and conspiracy in the Kingdom of Orlando. He was the restorer of the Medici family, the mastermind who had pushed the family step by step to the pinnacle of the kingdom's power. He walked into the hall, his gaze lingering on no one. It was as if these high and mighty figures were merely weeds by the roadside in his eyes. He walked straight to the end of the hall, toward the seat symbolizing supreme power. There, his son, Kingdom Marshal Robert Medici, was currently sitting. Robert watched his father approaching, his hand gripping the golden scepter, trembling violently. Harksun reached the foot of the steps and stopped. He did not speak, nor did he look up. He simply stood there quietly, with just a single glance. But that one glance made Robert, the so-called savior of the kingdom, spring up from his chair as if electrocuted. F.A. Father. He scrambled to straighten his clothes. Then, like a child who had done something wrong, bowed his head and hunched his back, quickly retreating from the chair that symbolized the regent's power. He stepped to the side of the dais, respectfully yielding the position. Harksun nodded and stepped up the stairs, his movements elegant and composed. He turned and sat slowly in the chair, his hands folded over the snake-headed cane. With that single act of sitting, it was as if a stabilizing force had returned. The atmosphere of the entire hall changed instantly. Harksun lifted his eyelids, his clouded yet sharp eyes slowly sweeping over the nobles below, who were already trembling in silence. Have you finished making a scene? His voice was not loud, somewhat hoarse, but it reached everyone's ears clearly. If you have, then sit down, Harksun said flatly. Let's talk about business. Let's talk about how to keep the heads on your shoulders and the purses in your pockets. It's a touching sentiment, really, seeing a man so concerned about the financial well-being of people he's clearly about to bankrupt. Hearing the word purses, many nobles shuddered. A slightly bolder marquis steeled himself and stepped forward, attempting to use the same rhetoric from before against Robert. Your Grace, it is not that we wish to cause trouble. It is simply that this war has dragged on too long, and our family coffers are empty. Besides, the western border is gaining momentum, and we were only acting for the survival of our families. For the survival of your families? Harksun chuckled, simply extending a hand. A servant behind him immediately handed over a stack of thick, yellowed ledgers. Harksun opened the ledger, his finger tracing lightly over it. Count Green. Harksun read the name of the count who had led the descent. If I recall correctly, your family still has 3 outstanding loans totaling 100,000 gold coins with the Medici Chamber of Commerce. The collateral is your 3 mines in the eastern part of the royal territory. And Hark-sun turned a page. Last winter, to evade tariffs, you used your family caravan to smuggle 5,000 bolts of silk and 2,000 barrels of wine from the Southern Territory. The manifest for these goods and the signatures of those involved are all here with me. Count Green's face turned deathly pale instantly, cold sweat pouring down like rain. Smuggling was a capital offense. Although everyone did it, once brought to light, it was grounds for confiscation and execution. This. Hark-sun ignored him and continued turning pages. Viscount Barton, you owe 50,000 gold coins to the casino. Viscount Kevin, you sold military equipment to mercenary groups without authorization. Every time Hark-sun read a name, he would report a figure precise to the last digit or a scandal capable of ruining someone's reputation. It took only 10 minutes. I've seen people take longer to decide on a lunch order. The troublemakers in the hall who had been clamoring for a ceasefire, surrender, or even defecting to the western border were all ashen-faced, slumped in their chairs. They realized with horror that their lifeblood had long been held firmly in the hands of this old man. Closing the ledger, Hark-sun looked at the flock of lambs waiting for slaughter below. Gentlemen, the accounts are clear. The western border is fighting under the banner of clearing the court of evil. If that so-called Queen Lin wins, do you think, based on your knowledge of Sir Lucius, he will acknowledge the debts you owe the Medici family? Hark-sun shook his head. Of course not. He will burn all the IOUs and, to win over the hearts of the people, declare all debts void. But I, Hark-sun, never do business at a loss. If the western border wins and I cannot collect my debts, then I will have to collect some interest before that happens. Hark-sun's gaze became as sharp as a blade. For instance, using your heads or your family territories to settle the debt. By then, everyone would just die together. A naked threat. But before the crowd could fall into total despair, Hark-sun changed his tone, tossing out bait they could not refuse. However, if the western border loses, if the Medici family wins, Hark-sun held up 3 fingers. All debts owed to the Medici Bank by those present will be reduced by 30 to 50%, the amount determined by your contributions, and all interest will be waived. Furthermore, in the feast of dividing the western border after the war, I guarantee that everyone here will get a piece of the fat. Whoosh! A stifled gasp echoed through the hall. A 30% debt reduction. How much money was that? It was a massive sum capable of bringing a family on the brink of bankruptcy back to life. A stick to beat them, then a sweet treat to follow. It's amazing how quickly principles evaporate when the bank offers a discount. Hark-sun used the simplest yet most effective binding of interest to instantly quell all disputes and wavering. The nobles who had just wanted to surrender were now forced back onto the Medici warship to protect their own assets and for the sake of that enticing reduction. Because they had no choice. Siding with the western border meant an uncertain future. Siding with Hark-sun meant at least paying less debt. We are willing to die for your grace. Wipe out the western border rebels. Watching the nobles below, forced back into a state of fanaticism, Hark-sun closed the ledger expressionlessly. Very good. Since we have reached a consensus, you may leave. Go back, reorganize your troops, and prepare for war. Also, I hope you all understand one thing. Princess Lin is dead. This matter is indisputable. After the meeting, only the father and son remained in the hall. Robert stood to the side, head bowed. Father, Robert gathered his courage, trying to defend himself. I know I spent a bit too much this time, but I held the royal capital. I defeated the North. My strategy was effective. It's just that those nobles were too greedy. Smack! A crisp sound of a slap interrupted Robert's rambling. Hark-sun didn't even stand up. He simply backhanded Robert across the face. The blow was heavy. Half of Robert's face swelled instantly, and blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. But he didn't dare dodge, didn't even dare cover it, and could only stand straight again. Fool. Hark-sun took out a handkerchief to wipe his hand, his tone filled with deep disappointment. Do you still not know where you went wrong? Robert opened his mouth. Your greatest stupidity is not losing to the North, nor is it spending that money. Hark-sun stared into his son's eyes, teaching him word by word. Money, once spent, can be earned again. But prestige, once lost, is very hard to regain. Your greatest mistake was letting everyone see your trump card, only money. You used money to buy hearts, used money to fight wars, used money to solve everything. It was effective, but it also let those wolves see your weakness. They know that as long as they bite you, gold coins will fall out, which is why they are greedy and insubordinate. A true ruler must have not only gold coins in their hands, but also a blade. And the blade must be brighter and sharper than the gold. Robert shuddered, cold sweat soaking his back. Then, what should we do next? Robert asked humbly. Should we take advantage of the current morale and immediately assemble a great army to march west for a decisive battle? A decisive battle? Harksun sneered, looking at him as if he were an idiot. The wolf from the north has just left, the lion from the west is sharpening its teeth, and the moon from the east is still hanging high in the sky. If you go to a decisive battle now, are you afraid the Medici family won't die fast enough? Harksun stood up, walked to the map, and directly rejected Robert's plan for quick success. Since the western border dares to openly declare a kingdom, it means they are fully prepared. Thorn City has high walls and deep moats, and with that fellow Lucius sitting there, a frontal assault is a poor strategy. He picked up a command baton and drew a circle around the royal capital. Pass the order. Retrench the defensive line. Abandon the indefensible outposts and towns outside the royal territory and concentrate all troops and supplies on these 4 points: Splendor Fortress, Red Maple Fortress, and Black River Ferry. Construct an iron triangle defense zone around the royal capital. This was the strategy of a seasoned statesman. Although it meant losing vast tracts of land, it would preserve strength to the greatest extent and keep them in an invincible position. Robert nodded repeatedly, but then, as if remembering something, he said hesitantly, "But, Father, I have already dispatched the Viper. That assassination plan, it can no longer be recalled. If the Viper strikes in Thorn City, will it provoke the western border and cause them to launch a full-scale offensive early?" That assassination plan targeting Lin and I was Robert's final gamble, but now it seemed somewhat redundant. I suppose it's nice to know my life is being treated with the same strategic importance as a budget audit. Harksun paused, then sneered at Robert. "Can't recall him? Let him go," he said, indifferent to the assassin's fate. "Let him die." Robert was stunned. "You think one assassin can kill the false queen amidst the western border's armies?" Harksun scoffed. "If it were that easy, she'd be dead already." Harksun's eyes narrowed. "Still, this move isn't useless. It's a perfect way to test Lucius Laroche's vigilance. If they can't stop a single assassin, they aren't worth fighting. If they do," Harksun tossed his baton onto the table, "then it's a real war. Bring me Prime Minister Rhine. We need him. And summon the moon's envoy tonight. We must bring them down from the heavens." Robert bowed and left. Harksun rubbed his temples, weary but intrigued. Finally, this game is getting interesting. At the Sun Palace, in the Regent's study, this power center, once Federico's and then Robert's, now served its third master. Harksun didn't care for the grand mahogany desk his son favored. He sat in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, wrapped in a wool blanket, sipping tea. He looked like a common old man, yet Prime Minister Rhine sat opposite him, tense and guarded. The veteran politician, who had survived 2 reigns, sat rigid, his hands folded, looking grave. "Try the tea, Prime Minister." Harksun's tone was warm, like an old friend. "It's Golden Leaf from the Midsummer Islands. My caravans keep it coming even in these chaotic times. I'm a creature of habit," Harksun added. Rhine stared at the steam, unmoved. "Duke Harksun," he said, exhausted. "The capital is in ruins. The West has rebelled and crowned a new queen. I have no heart for tea. Speak plainly." Harksun smiled, his eyes glinting. "Let's talk business." He remained calm, avoiding Robert's brute force. "You are a smart man, Rhine. You know the boy, Aiden, is nothing but a figurehead." Rhine twitched, but Harksun silenced him with a gesture. "Don't deny it. Whether it's Robert or me, that child is just a rubber stamp." Harksun leaned forward, his presence suffocating. "He is a puppet, but he is the kingdom's face, the foundation of order. This is no longer just a struggle for the throne." He pointed west. "It is order versus rebellion. That queen in the west, regardless of whether she is truly Lynn Aurora, exists to shatter all rules. She seeks to settle old scores, dismantle the nobility, and impose a new order led by Western barbarians." Harksun locked eyes with Rhine. Do you think there's a place for the Graham family in that order? Ryan fell silent. The question hit home, though I'm sure he'd have preferred a less existential interrogation before lunch. The West's rise was built on purging the old nobility. Their treatment of border lords proved it. We must unite, Harksun said softly. I need you, Ryan. The Medici have wealth and soldiers, but we are outsiders to the capital's power. I need you to remain prime minister and support the court. I need the Graham family's century-old prestige to soothe the nobles and keep the government running, even if it's just a facade of stability. Harksun smirked. What if I refuse? Ryan asked, struggling. You could retire or... Harksun shifted topics. I heard your grandson, Clark, was injured at the tournament. Ryan's body stiffened, his eyes sharpening into daggers. What do you want? Relax, Harksun said innocently. He's a talent. My Iron Vault Guard needs a deputy commander. The capital is dangerous, full of assassins. If he isn't under my protection, an accident might happen. A grandfather burying his grandson. How tragic. It was a naked threat. Ryan's nails dug into his palms. He felt a profound, crushing helplessness. Unlike Robert's blade to the throat, Harksun's soft-edged knife was far more terrifying.